Hey guys, just want to say thanks for tuning in today. Smash that subscribe button if you're new here, and as always, please like this video if you enjoy the stories. Now, let's get into the stories.
I knew the night was off before it even started because the air felt stale in that fake way it does inside places that want to look cool but smell like old mop water and burnt coffee. The kind of place where the lights are always a little too dim and the chairs wobble no matter which one you pick. I had been sitting there way too long, pretending to scroll my phone while checking the door every few seconds like an idiot. People around me probably thought I got stood up, and honestly, I was starting to think that too. Then she finally showed up late, sat down across from me, and asked if I was ready to apologize for something she refused to explain. That moment hit me weird, like when you miss a step on the stairs and your body panics before your brain catches up. I did not even know how to react because I had been replaying our messages in my head all day, trying to figure out what I could have messed up. Nothing came to mind. Still, she just sat there, staring at me with this calm face that did not match what she was putting on me. No smile, no annoyance, just this blank look like she was waiting for a test answer I did not have. I remember thinking maybe this was some kind of joke or weird mood. I had never met her in person before, just online, and she had seemed normal enough. Sarcastic, kind of funny, into the same dumb horror videos I watched late at night. I told myself this was just first meet awkwardness, but my chest felt tight anyway, and my hands would not stop fidgeting under the table. She was dressed way too formal for the place, like she had just come from something important, and her shoes were spotless even though it had been raining earlier. Little details like that stuck out more than they should have. Her eyes kept drifting past me, like she was checking reflections in the window behind my head. Every time I shifted, she adjusted too, matching me without looking obvious about it. It felt less like a date and more like being lined up. The waiter came by and I ordered something random just to fill the space. She ordered the same thing without even glancing at the menu. That should not have bothered me, but it did. The longer we sat there, the heavier everything felt. She kept tapping the table in this slow pattern, not nervous, just steady. It matched the clock on the wall behind her, ticking way louder than it should have been. I tried to think of what apology she wanted. I thought maybe I had liked an old photo of someone else or taken too long to reply one night. My brain kept spinning, grabbing at nothing. I started feeling guilty even though I had no reason to be. That was the worst part. It felt like being accused in a dream where the rules keep changing. When the food came, she did not eat. She just pushed it around, tracing the edge of the plate with her fork like she was outlining something. Grease from the lights above reflected off her plate in a way that made it hard to look at directly. I noticed then that she never blinked fully, just half blinks that left her eyes looking wet and fixed. Time started doing that stretchy thing where minutes feel wrong. I checked my phone and saw only a few minutes had passed, but it felt way longer. My phone battery had dropped way more than it should have, like it had been draining in the background. I remember thinking that was dumb to notice, but I did anyway. Eventually, she stood up without warning. The chairs scraped loud against the floor, and a couple people looked over. She walked toward the door and paused like she expected me to follow. I did. I did not even know why. It felt automatic, like I was already committed to something just by sitting down. Outside, the rain had stopped, but everything was slick and shining under the streetlights. The parking lot behind the place was mostly empty, just a few cars and a dumpster pushed against a brick wall. She headed straight for it, not the street. My stomach dropped, but my feet kept moving. Back there, the noise from the restaurant faded fast. It felt like stepping into another room. She stopped near the dumpster and finally turned to face me fully. Up close, her skin looked stretched tight, like she had not slept in days. There were faint marks on her wrist, not cuts, more like pressure marks, evenly spaced. I stared too long and felt rude but could not help it. That was when she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, holding it toward me. The screen showed a photo of me, not one I recognized. It was me sitting on my bed, head down, taken from the corner near my door. My room, my live, my throat went dry. I wanted to laugh it off, tell myself it was fake, but the poster on my wall in the background was torn in the same spot I had noticed that morning. My mind went blank in a way that felt cold. I realized then that she had never really been looking at me all night. She had been watching for something else, maybe someone else. Her tapping stopped. The air felt thicker, like the rain had never actually left. She leaned closer, close enough that I could smell this sharp, clean scent on her, like cleaning spray. Her eyes searched my face, not angry, just focus. I understood without words that the apology she wanted was not about something small or recent. It was about something she believed I had done just by existing where I did. I backed up without thinking and bumped into the dumpster. The metal was cold through my jacket. The sound echoed louder than it should have. She tilted her head like she was disappointed but not surprised. Behind her, the brick wall had dark streaks from old water damage that looked almost like handprints if you stared too long. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I flinched hard. When I pulled it out, there was a notification from her account, sent seconds ago. It was a photo of the back of my head, taken right then. The angle was wrong, too high. My hand started shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I turned fast, scanning the lot, the shadows between cars, the edge of the alley. Nothing moved. When I looked back at her, she was smiling for the first time, small and tight, like she had been waiting for me to notice. Something about that smile broke whatever spell I had been under. I ran. I did not look back. My shoes slipped on the wet pavement and my lungs burned, but I did not stop until I was inside my car with the doors locked. My hands fumbled with the keys so bad it took forever to start. When I finally did it, I glanced up and saw her standing at the edge of the lot, perfectly still, watching me leave. I drove home on pure panic, checking mirrors constantly, expecting headlights to appear behind me. They never did. When I got to my place, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at my dark windows. I did not want to go inside. When I finally did, everything looked normal at first. Too normal. Then I noticed my bedroom door was not how I left it. Just slightly off, enough that I knew. On my bed was my phone, plugged in and fully charged. I was holding my phone already. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. I left that night and did not go back for days. I blocked her on everything, deleted apps, changed passwords. None of that stopped the photos. They still show up sometimes from random numbers. Places I recognize. Angles I do not. The first thing that hit me was how loud the place was. Not music loud, but human loud. Like forks clanking too hard and people laughing a second too long. It made my head buzz before I even spotted him. I remember standing just inside the doorway of this roadside diner that smelled like grease and fake maple syrup, thinking I should turn around and pretend I never showed up. My phone was already in my hand, like I was ready to text an excuse. I wish I had. He was easy to spot because the booth across from the window had 3 seats and only one person in it. He sat on the far left side, leaving the middle seat empty, not even pushed in. It was perfectly lined up like someone was supposed to be there. When I slid into the seat across from him, he did not look surprised. He nodded once, like I was late but expected. The intro part was already wrong. Not awkward wrong, but wrong like I had walked into the middle of something that started way before me. His eyes kept drifting to the empty seat beside him. Not in a nervous way either. It was casual, familiar, like checking on someone you know well. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself people are weird and first dates are always off. The diner itself felt stuck in time. Cracked vinyl seats, old photos on the wall that had faded faces and names no one remembered. The windows were streaked like they never really got clean. Outside was just highway and darkness. No town lights. It felt isolated in a way that made my phone suddenly feel useless. The waitress came over and he ordered for himself and then gestured to the empty chair, explaining something I could not hear over the noise. She nodded like this was normal and wrote it down. My stomach dropped a little, but I still did not say anything. I hate being the person who makes scenes, especially on dates. I figured maybe he was messing with me in some awkward joke way. Food came fast. Too fast. Plates crowded the table, including one placed carefully in front of the empty seat. Steam rose off it like it was meant to be eaten. He adjusted the plate so it lined up perfectly with the edge of the table, then glanced at me like he was checking my reaction. I focused on my fries and told myself to calm down. As he ate, he kept turning his head toward the empty chair, nodding, smiling faintly, reacting to things that were not there. His expressions changed like he was in a real conversation. Annoyed, amused, thoughtful. The worst part was how natural it looked. Not exaggerated, not dramatic, just normal dinner behavior aimed at nothing. I tried to ground myself by noticing details. The way his jacket was folded beside him, the scar on his knuckle, the way the lights flickered slightly every time the kitchen door opened. Time felt stretched, like the meal was taking forever even though my plate kept emptying. Halfway through, he did something that made my chest feel tight. He gestured toward me and then toward the empty chair, like he was explaining who I was. His face looked serious, then respectful almost. I understood without words that he was presenting me as someone filling a spot. Not meeting me, not introducing himself to me, but slotting me into something that already existed. I started feeling cold even though the diner was warm. I wondered if anyone else noticed. People around us kept eating, laughing, living their lives. No one stared. No one questioned the extra plate that kept going untouched. The waitress even came by to refill the empty glass in front of the chair, like it was the most normal thing in the world. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, and I almost laughed at how stupid that felt compared to everything else. I checked the time and realized we had been there way longer than I thought. My sense of it was completely off. He finished his food and wiped his hands carefully, then pushed the empty chair in just a bit, like making space. Then he stood in motion for me to follow him to the counter to pay. I did not even remember agreeing to that part. My legs felt heavy, but I got up anyway. At the counter, he pulled out cash and paid for 3 meals. I saw the total on the little screen, $47. He did not hesitate. He did not look annoyed. It was routine. He picked up the receipt and folded it neatly, then paused and looked back at the booth like he was checking something one last time. Outside, the air was thick and smelled like wet asphalt. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few trucks idling far away. His car was parked close, an older sedan with foggy windows. He opened the passenger door for me, but before I could get in, he opened the back door too and waited. Waited like someone else was supposed to climb in first. That was when I finally felt panic spike sharp instead of dull. My heart started racing and my mouth felt dry. I shook my head and stepped back, pretending to check my phone. He looked confused for the first time all night. Genuinely confused, like something was not following the script. He closed the back door slowly, then looked at me again. His face was blank now. Not angry, not sad. Just empty. The silence between us felt louder than the diner ever did. I could hear the hum of a truck engine across the lot and the buzz of a broken light above us. I realized then that he had not actually looked at me much all night. Not really. His attention was split, always drifting back to that space beside him. I was not the focus. I was a placeholder. I told him I was tired and needed to go. I do not remember exactly how I said it, just that my voice sounded far away to my own ears. He nodded like he had expected that outcome. No argument, no surprise. He walked back toward the diner without looking back, like the night was done. I sat in my car for a long time before starting it. My hands were shaking and my legs felt weak. I watched him through the diner window. He slid back into the booth. The empty chair was still there. He sat and stared at it, unmoving. I drove home on autopilot, checking my mirrors even though I did not know why. When I got to my live, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to slow my breathing. Everything felt off, like I had stepped out of something unfinished. Later that night, I checked my phone and saw a notification from the app where we met. His profile was gone, deleted or removed. Our messages were still there, but his name was blank. No photo. Just empty space where a person had been. I tried to sleep but kept thinking about that chair. The way it was never pushed in. The way everyone treated it like it mattered. I kept picturing it beside my bed, pulled out slightly, waiting. A few days later, I passed that diner again during the day. Sunlight made it look smaller, less threatening. I almost convinced myself I had overreacted. Then I looked through the window. The booth was there, the same one, and the middle seat was pulled out, perfectly aligned with the table. I should have trusted the feeling I got the second I saw her hands. Not her face or her clothes or anything obvious like that, just her hands. They were already folded together on the table when I walked in, fingers pressed tight, like she had been waiting in that exact position for a long time. The restaurant was one of those quiet places pretending to be peaceful, all soft lighting and fake plants, like it wanted people to whisper even though no one told them to. The second I sat down across from her, the air felt heavier, like the room had leaned in. I remember thinking I was overdressed and underprepared at the same time. My shirt still smelled like the bus I took to get there, and she looked perfectly put together in a way that felt intentional. Not fancy, just precise, like every part of her had been chosen on purpose. Her bag was placed neatly under the table, her chair pushed in exactly the same distance as mine. Nothing was out of place. That should have been comforting. It was not. The place itself was a converted old house, all narrow rooms and creaky floors. Each table sat in its own little corner, separated by half walls and curtains that never fully close. It felt like being watched without seeing who was watching. There was soft music playing, but it kept cutting out for a second every few minutes, like the speakers were tired. When the server came by, she smiled politely and nodded, and I followed her lead without thinking. Water first, menu later. Everything felt slow, but rushed at the same time. I noticed she never touched her phone. It stayed face down on the table like it was not important anymore. Right before the food came, she reached across the table and gently touched my wrist, then pulled her hand back and folded it again. She closed her eyes. I froze. I thought maybe she was just really serious about beliefs or routines. I did not want to be rude. I did not want to be the guy who made a thing out of nothing. The prayer started quiet, almost calming. Her voice was low and steady like she had practiced it. At first, it sounded normal enough, the kind of stuff you expect. Thanks for the food. Thanks for the day. I relaxed a little, even felt dumb for being tense. Then it shifted. She started listing things, not general things, specific things, moments, choices, mistakes, stuff I had never told her, stuff I barely admitted to myself. She talked about me dropping out of a class sophomore year and lying about it to my parents. She talked about the job interview I skipped because I panicked in the parking lot. She talked about the friend I stopped replying to because I did not know how to help them and felt guilty about it. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might get sick. I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. Forks clinked. Someone laughed softly at another table. The music cut out again and came back. Her eyes stayed closed. Her voice never wavered. She kept going. She mentioned my live, the way my room always felt unfinished, boxes still unpacked months later. She mentioned the notebook under my bed where I wrote things I never showed to anyone. She mentioned how I always reread old messages late at night, read them until the words stopped meaning anything. My hands started shaking under the table. I wanted to interrupt. I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to stand up and leave. My body did none of those things. I sat there like my chair had grown into the floor. My face felt hot and cold at the same time. The worst part was how she framed it. Not accusing, not mocking, just stating, like she was reading off a list she had been given, like these were facts that belonged in a prayer just as much as gratitude did. It felt like being peeled open in public while everyone else kept eating. When the prayer finally ended, she opened her eyes and smiled softly, like something had been resolved. The food arrived right then, plates set down carefully between us. The timing made my skin crawl. Steam rose up and fogged my glasses, and for a second I was grateful for not being able to see her clearly. I pushed the food around without tasting it. My appetite was gone. She ate slowly, neatly, like nothing strange had just happened. She watched me the whole time, not in a creepy way exactly, more like she was checking in. Like she expected a certain reaction and was measuring how close I was to it. I tried to think logically. Maybe I had shared more online than I remembered. Maybe mutual friends. Maybe coincidence stacked on coincidence. But the details were too exact. The order she said them in matched the way they lived in my head. That was what scared me the most. At some point she reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. She did not open it. She just set it on the table beside her plate. It was old, edges worn, cover soft from use. I recognized it immediately. Not because it was unique, but because it looked exactly like mine. Same size, same color, same bent corner. My chest tightened. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. She rested her hand on the notebook like it mattered. I wondered if she was going to open it and read from it next. I do not know what would have happened if she did. The server came back to ask how everything was. I nodded too fast. She smiled again. The server left without noticing anything wrong. I realized then how alone I actually was in that moment, surrounded by people and completely isolated. She finished eating and wiped her hands with her napkin, folding it neatly when she was done. She glanced at the notebook, then at me, then back at the notebook. She slid it back into her bag like a decision had been made. When it was time to pay, she insisted on splitting it evenly. The total came to $62. I handed over my card without thinking. My hands still felt numb. When the receipt came back, I did not even look at it. We stood up to leave, and the floor creaked loudly under our feet. The sound made me flinch. She walked ahead of me toward the door, moving with that same calm purpose. Before stepping outside, she paused and turned slightly, like she was waiting for something else to happen. When it did not, she opened the door and went out. The night air felt too sharp, like it was trying to wake me up. The street was quiet, mostly empty, just parked cars and dark windows. She stopped on the sidewalk and finally looked at me fully. Her expression was neutral. Not kind, not cruel, just finished. She walked away without saying anything else, disappearing around the corner like she had somewhere specific to be. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I jumped. It was a notification from a notes app I never used. A new note. No title. Inside was a list. My list. Written in my words. Updated with something new at the bottom. Tonight. I deleted the app. I powered off my phone. I walked home instead of taking the bus, even though it took over an hour. When I got to my live, I locked the door and checked every room even though I knew no one would be there. The notebook under my bed was still there, untouched, but I have not opened it since. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head when I try to sleep, calm and steady, listing things I wish no one knew.
Hey guys, really sorry to disturb you, but if you're enjoying the stories up until this point, please smash that like button. That's all I'm asking for you guys. Let's break some records this year. Now back to the stories.
The night started with that fake excitement you get when you convince yourself this one might be different, like you are already tired but force energy into your body anyway. I remember checking my reflection in the dark window of the rideshare, thinking my face looked older than it should. The city lights blurred by and I kept telling myself this was just nerves, nothing else. I had only known him a few weeks, met online, talked late at night, nothing serious. Still, something about the way he picked the place felt heavy before I even arrived. The restaurant was on the top floor of a hotel, all glass walls and low lighting, like it wanted to feel private even though it was surrounded by people. The elevator ride up felt too long. My ears popped, and my phone lost signal halfway, which I noticed way more than I should have. When the doors opened, the sound changed instantly, softer, like everything was padded. He was already there, standing near the table instead of sitting. The table was small, round, with a view of the whole city. Candles flickered even though there was no wind. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that felt practiced. Not fake exactly, but rehearsed, like he had done this moment before. Before I'd even sat down, a server appeared with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. I did not order it. I had not even opened the menu yet. The bottle popped softly, and the sound echoed weirdly in the quiet room. He looked proud, like this was an achievement unlocked. The server poured and left. The bubbles rose fast, tickling my nose. I barely had time to process what was happening when he lifted his glass and smiled at me like we were sharing a private joke. That was when he said it was our 1-year anniversary. Not joking, not teasing. Serious, happy, settled. My brain stalled. I laughed because that is what you do when something makes no sense, but you are not ready to panic yet. I assumed he misspoke. Maybe he meant 1 month. Maybe it was a reference to something dumb. But he did not correct himself. He just watched me with this calm confidence that made my skin prickle. We sat down and the city stretched out behind him, lights blinking like something alive. He kept glancing at his phone, not checking messages, just unlocking it and setting it face down again. I noticed his hands were steady, not nervous at all. He started scrolling through his photos and turned the screen toward me. The first image made my stomach drop. It was me, standing outside a coffee place near my live. I remembered that day clearly because it had rained suddenly and I got soaked. In the photo, I was laughing, hair plastered to my face, looking at someone just off frame. I did not remember anyone taking that picture. I told myself it was a coincidence. People look alike. Places look similar. Then he swiped. There were more. Me on a park bench, head tilted back, eyes closed. Me walking into a grocery store. Me sitting on my own couch, legs pulled up, wearing the hoodie I sleep in. My hands started to shake so bad I had to set my glass down before I spilled it. He kept swiping, slow and careful, like he was showing off something precious. Each photo came with a memory he clearly believed we shared. Trips I never took. Meals I never ate with him. Nights watching movies in my live that never happened. In some photos, I was smiling at the camera. In others, I was unaware, caught mid-movement. I felt exposed in a way I had never felt before. Not embarrassed. Violated is too strong, but something close to it, like my life had been watched and recorded and edited without me knowing. I tried to find flaws, bad angles, signs of editing. But the details were too real. The chipped paint near my window. The old plant I forgot to throw out. The lamp that flickers if you bump the cord. The server came back to take our order and I nodded along to whatever he said, barely hearing it. My focus tunneled on the phone in his hand. When the server left, he leaned back and finally looked satisfied, like he had reached the part of the night he was most excited about. He explained the anniversary plan like it was normal. How proud he was we made it a full year. How patient he had been. How hard it was at first when I did not seem to remember things. He said that part almost gently, like talking about a phase someone grows out of. I started scanning the room for exits. The glass walls suddenly felt like traps, reflections everywhere, making it hard to tell where anything really was. I noticed then that our table was positioned in a way that cameras from the ceiling pointed directly at us. I wondered how long they had been there. I wondered if he knew the staff. Food arrived. I could not eat. My stomach felt hollow and tight. He ate like he was celebrating, taking his time, enjoying each bite. Every now and then he would glance at his phone again, like checking notes. I wondered if there were more photos he had not shown me yet. Ones worse than these. I asked myself how this was possible. Maybe he had been following me longer than I thought. Maybe those weeks we talked were just the surface. I replayed our first messages in my head, trying to find warning signs. The way he always seemed to know when I was tired. The way he referenced places I liked before I mentioned them. I had brushed it off as compatibility. Halfway through dinner, he pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was a printed photo. Us together, really together, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest. We were standing in front of a mirror, my mirror. I recognized the crack in the corner. I felt dizzy. I knew then that this was not just about pictures. It was about a story he had been living without me, or maybe with me, just not the version of me that gets to decide. The idea made my chest ache. I pushed my chair back slightly, pretending to adjust. My legs felt weak. I wanted to run, but did not know how without causing a scene. He noticed the movement and smiled softly, like reassurance, like everything was fine. The bill came without us asking. He paid without looking at the total. I caught a glimpse of it anyway. $138. The number stuck in my head for no reason. Maybe because it made the night feel official documented. When we stood to leave, he reached for my hand. I pulled away and pretended not to notice, grabbing my bag instead. He did not push it. He just nodded, like this was another step he expected. The elevator ride down was silent. The mirrored walls showed us from every angle. I watched my own face carefully, making sure I looked calm. The doors opened, and the lobby felt too bright, too open. I walked fast, not looking back, not waiting. Outside, the night air felt real again, loud, messy. I kept walking until my legs burned. I did not check my phone until I was blocks away. There were new photos, time-stamped minutes ago, me leaving the hotel, me from behind, me crossing the street. I did not go back to my live that night. I stayed with a friend and barely slept. The next morning, there was a message from him, a happy one, thanking me for celebrating, saying he could not wait for year two. I blocked him, deleted everything, changed my routines. Still, sometimes I find new photos saved on my phone, buried in folders I do not remember creating. Dates that stretch back further than a year. Moments I do not recognize but wear my face. The moment I put my phone on the table, I felt like I had already messed up, like I had stepped onto ice without checking how thick it was first. It was a tiny feeling at first, barely there, the kind you ignore because you do not want to seem dramatic. The cafe looked normal enough, almost boring. Concrete floors, metal chairs, chalkboard menu that tried too hard to be funny. People typing on laptops, couples leaning in close, the usual noise hum that makes everything blend together. Nothing about the place warned me that I was about to lose control of the night. We had been talking for a couple weeks, and she seemed intense but in a focused way. Organized, confident. She picked the spot and the time and even suggested where we should sit because the lighting was better there. I remember thinking it was nice not having to decide everything for once. I showed up early, grabbed a table, checked my phone a few times like a reflex. When she walked in, she spotted me immediately, like she already knew exactly where I would be. After we ordered drinks, she glanced at my phone and asked me to leave it on the table, face down. She said it casually, like it was a preference, not a rule. I hesitated for half a second and did it anyway. I did not want to look attached to my phone. I did not want to look rude. I set it down between us, screen against the wood, and tried to forget about it. At first, everything felt normal. She talked about work, about how she hated wasting time, about how people were always half present these days. She made a point of looking directly at me the whole time, barely blinking. It was intense, but flattering in a weird way. Like I had her full attention and that meant something. Then my phone buzzed. It was subtle, just a small vibration, but my body reacted instantly. I reached for it without thinking. Before my fingers even touched the edge, she slid it away from me with 2 fingers, smooth and fast, like she had been waiting for that exact move. The phone stopped closer to her side of the table. I laughed, mostly out of shock. She did not. She just kept talking, not missing a beat, like nothing had happened. My hand stayed frozen in the air for a second before I pulled it back, feeling stupid. The buzz happened again a minute later, then again. Each time, my attention snapped to that spot on the table like a magnet. Each time, she ignored it. She started asking me questions that felt oddly timed, like she knew when my phone would go off and talked right over it on purpose. I tried to focus on her words, but my thoughts kept drifting. What if it was something important? What if someone needed me? I told myself it was probably nothing. Still, the feeling in my chest kept growing tight and uncomfortable. She reached out and nudged the phone even farther away until it was almost at the edge of the table near her elbow. The screen stayed dark, face down, useless. I could not see anything. It felt wrong in a way I could not explain, like a door had been shut quietly behind me. The cafe started to feel different after that. Louder in some ways, quieter in others. I noticed how far away the exit was from our table. I noticed how the windows reflected the inside lights so you could not really see out. I noticed that no one around us was looking at their phones anymore, or maybe they were and I just started noticing it because I was not allowed to. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice, even though I could still hear her fine. She talked about being present, about how easy it was to control a moment if you remove distractions. The way she said control made my stomach flip. My phone buzzed again, longer this time. She placed her hand flat over it, not aggressively, just resting there, claiming the space. Her nails were short and clean. Her hand was warm. The buzzing stopped. I asked if I could check it. My voice sounded off to my own ears, thinner than usual. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She said something about trust and attention, and how rude it was to disappear into a screen when someone was sitting right in front of you. She said it like a lesson she had given before. I tried to argue in my head, but nothing came out of my mouth. I hated that part later, how easy it was for me to stop pushing. She slid my phone off the table completely and set it on the empty chair beside her, face down still, just out of reach. That was when I realized how dependent I was on it. not just for messages, but for grounding, time, escape. Without it, I felt exposed, like I was sitting there without skin. She started steering the conversation into more personal stuff, my routines, my schedule, where I usually went after work, how often I went home versus stayed out late. She remembered everything I said, repeating it back later in the night like she was checking for consistency. The drinks came and went. I barely tasted mine. She would not touch hers much either. Her focus stayed locked on me. Every time my eyes drifted toward the chair where my phone sat, she noticed. Every time. At some point, she reached over and turned the phone slightly like she was adjusting it. The movement caught the light just right, and for a split second I saw the screen light up. Dozens of notifications stacked on top of each other. Missed calls, messages. My chest tightened hard. I stood up halfway, chair scraping loud against the floor. Heads turned. She stayed seated, calm, and reached out, gripping the edge of the table. She told me to sit back down, not loudly, not threatening, just firm, like this was expected behavior. I should have left then. I know that now. Instead, I sat. She talked about rules after that. Not hers exactly, just rules in general. How every good system had them. How people felt safer when they knew what was allowed and what was not. She said most people broke rules because they did not think anyone was paying attention. She said she paid attention. The cafe started closing around us. Chairs stacked. Lights dimmed. I did not notice until someone wiped the table next to us. I had no idea how much time had passed. My phone stayed on the chair, silent now. When the bill came, she pulled it toward her and paid without asking. The total was $34. She said it was only fair since she chose the place. I did not argue. I barely nodded. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. The street was quiet, empty in that late-night way that makes sounds echo. She picked up my phone and held it for a second, weighing it in her hand. My whole body tensed. She handed it back to me slowly, watching my face as I took it. The screen lit up immediately, flooding my vision with missed everything. The time was way later than I thought. I had been gone for hours. I stepped back, gripping the phone too tight, like it might disappear again. She smiled, satisfied, like she had proven a point. She said she hoped I learned something about being present. Then she turned and walked away without looking back. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, scrolling through notifications I did not even read, just needing the motion to light. When I finally got home to my lib, I locked the door and set my phone on the table, face up this time, like I needed to prove something to myself. Later that night, as I was half asleep, my phone buzzed again. One new message, no name. Just a sentence about how I had done better than she expected and how next time would be easier. There was no next time. But sometimes when my phone is face down on a table, I feel that same tight pull in my chest, like I am about to lose it again. The night felt off before I even met him, like the air was already leaning towards something bad and I just kept walking anyway. I remember standing at the edge of the parking lot staring at the place, a little late, telling myself I was being dramatic. It was one of those old bowling alleys that tried to reinvent itself as a hangout spot. Half arcade, half bar, half diner, none of it done very well. The neon sign flickered like it was tired. I'd almost turned around. Almost. Inside smelled like old shoes and sugary drinks. The floors were sticky in patches and the lights buzzed overhead. It was louder than I expected, balls crashing into pins over and over, mixed with music that sounded slightly warped. It should have felt public and safe. Instead, it felt chaotic, like no one would notice if something went wrong. He was already there, sitting at a small table near the snack counter, back against the wall. Not bowling, not playing games, just watching the lanes like he was studying patterns. When he saw me, he smiled and waved, relaxed, confident. Nothing about him screamed danger. That was the problem. We ordered food from the counter and sat down. Greasy fries, soda in plastic cups. Normal. He talked easily at first, cracking jokes about how weird the place was, how he liked spots that felt forgotten. I laughed more than I meant to. My nerves always make me do that. I noticed early on that he paid attention to my movements. Not in a creepy way at first, just observant. When I crossed my legs, he shifted. When I leaned back, he leaned back. It felt like mirroring, like something you read about in body language articles. I brushed it off. Time moved strangely. I checked my phone once and felt bad about it, like I was being rude even though he did not say anything. I put it face down on the table without him asking. He nodded slightly, approving, which should have bothered me more than it did. About halfway through, I started thinking about leaving. Not because anything specific had happened, just a buildup of little things. The noise, the smell, the way he kept glancing toward the exit behind me. I started planning an excuse in my head. Early morning, headache, something believable. That was when he changed. His tone stayed calm, but the content shifted like he had flipped a page. He told me he liked to be prepared, that he hated being caught off guard. He said he had practiced conversations before important moments his whole life. Interviews, hard talks, emergencies. He said this date counted. My stomach tightened, but I stayed quiet, waiting for the punchline that never came. He explained that he had gone over different versions of the night ahead of time. What he would say if I stayed the whole time. What he would say if I seemed bored. What he would say if I tried to leave early. He said it like it was thoughtful, considerate even, like he was proud of the planning. My hands went cold around my cup. The bowling balls crashing suddenly sounded too loud, too close. I realized then that he had positioned himself between me and the wall, while my side of the table faced the open space. I had to get past him to leave. He leaned back and smiled, like he was checking my reaction against his expectations. He said this part was the middle section, the part where most people start thinking about exits. He said it casually, like a fun fact, like he had read it somewhere. I laughed, because my body did not know what else to do. It came out raw, high, and short. He nodded again, like that was one of the responses he had planned for. He told me about the version where I stand up and say I need to go. He described how he would stay calm, how he would remind me we were having a good time, how sudden exits usually come from anxiety, not instinct. He said he would suggest sitting a little longer so things could settle. My heart started racing. He had not raised his voice. He had not threatened me. But hearing my possible actions laid out like steps in a guide made me feel trapped in advance, like the future was already mapped and I was just walking it. I glanced around, hoping to catch someone's eye, but everyone was busy. A kid ran past us carrying bowling shoes. Someone laughed loudly at a strike. Life kept going. He kept going too. He talked about another version where I pretended to get a call. He said that one was common. He explained how he would comment on how interesting timing could be, how people sometimes use phones to escape moments they did not understand yet. He said understand yet, like staying longer would fix whatever was wrong. I felt my phone buzzing faintly on the table and my chest tightened. I did not move for it. He said there was even a version where I became upset, defensive. He said he had lines prepared to de-escalate that too. He said he practiced them out loud in his car before coming in. The image of him alone in a parked car, rehearsing ways to stop me from leaving, made my skin crawl. I asked him why he was telling me this. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He smiled and said honesty mattered. He said he did not like surprises, and he believed transparency built trust. That was when I noticed the small notebook on the table beside his arm. Plain cover. Worn edges. It had not been there before, or maybe I just had not noticed it. It was open to a page filled with neat handwriting. Bullet points. Lines crossed out. I caught a glimpse of words that looked like timing and reassure and redirect. My heart dropped into my stomach. I pushed my chair back slightly, testing the space. The legs scraped loud against the floor. He stopped talking instantly. His eyes locked onto mine, alert now, fully focused. He told me this was the part where most people joke and say they are not going anywhere. He said he was hoping for that version. I stood up fully. My legs felt weak, but they held. Noise from the lanes crashed into me all at once. He stayed seated, hands flat on the table, like he was grounding himself. He started into one of the practice paths. I could see it happen, like watching someone switch into a role. His posture shifted. His face softened. His voice lowered. Every word felt placed carefully, like stepping stones. I did not wait to hear the rest. I grabbed my phone and bag and moved around the table, putting distance between us. My heart hammered so hard I felt dizzy. He stood up too, slower, but he did not want to scare me. He followed me a few steps, Still talking, still calm, not chasing, guiding. That almost made it worse. I reached the doors and pushed through into the cold night air. The sound cut off behind me like a switch. I kept walking, then jogging, then running once I hit the sidewalk. I did not look back. I did not stop until I reached my car, hands shaking so bad it took a few tries to unlock it. I sat inside with the doors locked, breathing hard, staring at the dark windshield. After a minute, I checked my phone. There was a message from him already, sent seconds after I left. It said he had expected that outcome too and hoped I would reconsider once things cooled down. I blocked him, deleted everything. Still, days later, I found myself replaying the night, wondering how many other versions he had practiced. How many people had followed the script without realizing it? Sometimes when I think about leaving early now, anywhere, I get this tight feeling in my chest, like I am about to step into a conversation someone else already memorized. I could tell this date was going to be weird before it even officially started because she brought a folder. Not a cute notebook or a random bag, but a real folder, stiff and slightly bent at the corners, tucked under her arm like homework. We were meeting at a quiet wine bar that tried really hard to feel adult. All brick walls and low lamps and playlists that made everything sound slower than it was. I remember standing outside for a second, watching people through the window, thinking I was about to step into something that already had rules I did not know. She arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late, exactly. She checked her watch when she sat down, then placed the folder carefully on the table between us like it belonged there. I told myself it was probably work stuff. I told myself to relax. The bar smelled like citrus cleaner and old wood. Every sound echoed just a little too much. Our table was tucked into a corner near a shelf of dusty bottles that looked decorative more than useful. The lighting made everything look warm, but my chest felt tight anyway. At first, she was fine. Not fun exactly, but focused. She asked normal questions about my job, my commute, where I grew up. She listened closely, nodding, sometimes writing things down in the folder. That part made me laugh nervously, but she did not laugh with me. She just said she liked to keep track of things that mattered. She ordered for herself quickly and decisively. I ordered something random because I was already overthinking. When the server left, she leaned forward slightly, hands folded, eyes locked on mine. It felt like an interview, but with higher stakes. The kid's question came out of nowhere. Not eased into, not framed gently. Just dropped into the middle of the table like a weight. I paused longer than I should have, trying to figure out the least dramatic way to answer honestly. I finally said I did not want kids. Not now. Not later. Just no. Her entire body changed. It was subtle at first. Shoulders tightening. Jaw setting. Then her face flushed in a way that did not match the calm lighting. She stared at me like I had just said something offensive instead of personal. The silence stretched long enough that I started to feel embarrassed for answering it all. She told me I should have said that sooner. She told me time was not something people got to waste. She told me she had been very clear about her goals and that I had just set her back. The words came fast, clipped, like she had practiced them before. I tried to explain that we had only been talking a short time, that this was just a date, that no one had promised anything yet. She shook her head sharply, like I was missing something obvious. She opened the folder. Inside were pages, printed charts, timelines, handwritten notes, months and years mapped out in neat columns, names crossed out, dates circled, arrows connecting things that had not happened yet. My name was written at the top of one page, underlined. My stomach dropped. She slid the page toward me and tapped a section halfway down. She had written projections, where we would be living, when major decisions would happen, when things would need to change. The way she said need made my skin crawl. She accused me of lying by omission. She said people like me wasted valuable years by pretending not to know what they wanted. She said I had no right to sit there and take up space on her timeline if I was not willing to commit to it. People at nearby tables started glancing over. Not enough to intervene, just enough to notice. I felt my face burn. My hands shook as I pushed the folder back toward her. She pulled it back and snapped it shut, hard. The sound echoed louder than it should have. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, breathing fast through her nose like she was trying to calm herself. The drinks arrived then, placed awkwardly on the edge of the table like the server did not want to interrupt. I did not touch mine. She took a long sip of hers, eyes never leaving me. She started talking about age, about windows closing, about how men did not understand urgency because they were never held accountable for it. She said every date cost her something: time, energy, planning. She said I had just taken something from her and she wanted it acknowledged. I tried to stand up. My chair scraped loudly and my heart jumped. She immediately leaned forward again, palms flat on the table, not touching me, but close enough to feel like pressure. She told me to sit back down, not loudly, not kindly, like it was a correction. I sat. That part still messes with me, how easily I sat back down. She started listing other men, not by name, just by category. The one who waited too long, the one who changed his mind, the one who thought feelings were enough. She talked about them like failed steps, not people. She said she was done repeating cycles. She said she had chosen me carefully, that my answers lined up, my habits, my age. She said I fit perfectly until I did not. She said now she would have to adjust everything. She reopened the folder and started flipping pages, crossing things out aggressively. Black lines through dates, arrows redrawn, my name scribbled over until it was unreadable. Watching myself get erased in real time felt worse than being yelled at. I finally found my voice and told her this was not healthy. The words felt small as soon as they left my mouth. She laughed sharply and said planning was the only healthy thing left. The bill came before either of us asked for it. She snatched it up and stared at it like it personally offended her. The total was $56. She slammed her card down on the table and told me this was another cost she had not planned for. When the server left with the card, she leaned closer again. Her voice dropped low. She told me I should think more carefully next time before agreeing to meet someone with goals. She told me not everyone could afford uncertainty. I stood up again, slower this time, steadying myself on the table. She did not try to stop me. She just watched, eyes sharp, like she was already recalculating. I walked out without looking back. The night air hit me hard, cold, and grounding. My legs felt weak, but they moved. I did not stop until I was halfway down the block. Behind me through the window, I saw her still sitting there, folder open again, pen moving fast, already adjusting, already rewriting. When I got back to my live, I sat on the floor for a long time with my back against the door. My phone buzzed once. A message from her. Not angry, practical, saying she hoped I would be more upfront with the next person and not waste their time too. I blocked her and deleted the app. Still, sometimes when people ask me simple future questions, I feel that same tightness in my chest, like somewhere there is a folder with my name on it and lines waiting to be drawn. I did not know a chair could feel haunted until I sat in that one. It was one of those things you only realize after, when you replay the night and notice how every small detail was already pointing in the same direction. At the time, it just felt like bad luck stacked on top of nerves. I had arrived early, which I never do, and the restaurant was quieter than I expected for a Friday night. Dim lights, low ceiling, the kind of place where sound sticks around too long. The host led me to a two-top near the back, right against a brick wall that felt colder than the rest of the room. I checked my phone and told myself to relax. I had almost canceled twice that day for no real reason. The guy seemed normal enough online, dry humor, steady replies, nothing intense. When he showed up, he apologized for being a few minutes late and smiled like it mattered to him. He slid into the chair across from me and placed his jacket carefully over the back, smoothing it out like he cared how it looked even when no one was watching. The beginning was fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. He talked about work, about how he liked places with history. That part stuck out later. He said newer places felt fake to him, like they had not earned anything yet. He said this place had been around forever, that people had real moments here. I laughed politely and nodded. The table was small, barely enough room for plates. The brick wall behind me made the space feel tighter. I noticed there was a faint scratch on the table near my elbow, like someone had dragged something sharp across it. I kept tracing it with my finger without realizing. He excused himself to the bathroom about 20 minutes in. Nothing strange about that. He pushed his chair in neatly and told me he would be right back. I watched him disappear toward the hallway near the kitchen, then picked up my phone again. That was when the waiter came over. He did not ask if everything was okay or if I needed anything. He leaned in slightly, resting a hand on the table, eyes flicking toward the hallway where my date had gone. His voice was low, careful. He told me that the last woman who sat there had left crying. Not quietly either. Full breakdown. He said it like a warning, not gossip, like he felt responsible for telling me. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I asked what he meant without using words. My face must have shown it. He glanced around quickly, then straightened up and told me he could move me to another table if I wanted. He did not wait for an answer before adding that it had happened more than once. Same seat, same pattern. Before I could respond, he walked away like he had already said too much. I sat there frozen, staring at the empty chair across from me. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I scanned the room, suddenly aware of how far the exits were. The scratch on the table looked darker now. I wondered if it had been made by someone gripping too hard. I told myself not to overreact. People cry on dates all the time. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the waiter was exaggerating. Still, the warning settled into my chest and stayed there. My date came back a minute later, smiling like nothing had happened. He sat down and asked if I missed him. I nodded automatically, my brain still racing. He picked up where he left off like the conversation had been paused perfectly, not interrupted. I started watching him more closely. The way his smile lingered just a second too long. The way he tilted his head when I spoke, like he was evaluating tone instead of listening to words. He asked questions that felt harmless on the surface but left me feeling oddly exposed afterward. The food arrived and I barely touched mine. He ate slowly, methodically, like he was in no rush. He commented on how people always reveal themselves under pressure. He said dates were interesting because you could see how someone handled discomfort in real time. That word stuck. Discomfort. He asked me what made me uncomfortable. I gave vague answers. Crowds. Awkward silences. He nodded like he was taking notes. He said silence was underrated. That sometimes people said too much just to avoid it. Then he stopped talking. The silence stretched. Not awkward silence. Not exactly. Deliberate. He watched me carefully, eyes steady, waiting. My hands fidgeted in my lap. I became painfully aware of my breathing, of how loud it sounded to me. Finally, he smiled and started talking again, satisfied. He said that was interesting. That most people could not sit with silence for long. He said he had learned it the hard way. I thought about the waiter, about crying. My throat felt tight. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. He started talking about past dates, not in a bitter way, almost fond. He described how people always thought they were prepared until they were not. He said expectations broke people faster than anything else. I noticed then that he never asked me anything light. No favorite movies. No music. No dumb filler. Everything circled back to reactions, stress, limits. The room felt warmer, or maybe I was just overheating from nerves. I checked my phone under the table, screen dimmed. A friend had texted asking how it was going. I did not reply. He smiled again and told me I seemed tense. He said that was normal here. He gestured vaguely around us, like the building itself had an effect. He said some places pulled things out of people whether they wanted to share or not. I asked him if he came here often. He paused before answering, just a fraction of a second. Then he said yes, often enough. The waiter came back to refill water and gave me a look that lasted a beat too long, concerned, questioning. He glanced at the empty chair next to us, then back at me. I felt a jolt of fear that had nothing to do with logic. I excused myself to the bathroom this time. My legs felt shaky as I stood. He watched me go, eyes following until I disappeared down the hallway. I locked myself in a stall and leaned against the door, breathing hard. I splashed water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked pale, eyes too wide. I told myself to leave. Just walk out. I rehearsed it in my head, grabbed my bag, head straight for the door. No explanation. When I got back, he was sitting exactly how I left him, hands folded on the table, posture perfect. My bag was still where I'd put it. Nothing touched. He smiled like he had been waiting. I sat down because I did not know how not to. He asked if I was okay. The question felt loaded. I nodded anyway. He started talking about patterns. How people always thought their reactions were unique, but they never were. He said everyone hit the same breaking points eventually. He said he found that fascinating. My chest felt tight. I glanced at the chair I was sitting in, suddenly aware of my weight on it. The idea that someone else had been here, crying, losing it, made my skin crawl. He mentioned tears casually, not mine, just as a concept. He said crying was an honest response, that it meant something had landed. That was enough. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned. My heart pounded. I grabbed my bag and told him I was leaving with my whole body. I did not wait for permission. He stayed seated, calm. He told me to take care as I walked away. His tone was almost kind. That made it worse. I paid at the front without really seeing the total. It was $29. I left a tip I do not remember calculating. Outside, the air felt cold and sharp, like it was cutting through me. I walked fast, not looking back, not slowing down until I was halfway down the block. Later that night, lying on my couch in my live, I kept thinking about that seat, about how many people had sat there before me, how many had been warned too late or not at all. I never went back to that restaurant. Sometimes I wonder if the waiter still tries to warn people. Sometimes I wonder if anyone listens. The first time she corrected me, I laughed because it felt harmless and almost flattering, like she was paying attention. We were sitting in a small bookstore cafe that smelled like dust and burnt coffee, the kind of place where the tables are uneven and the chairs never quite match. Rain tapped softly against the front windows and made the street outside look blurry and fake, like a screensaver. I had already told myself this date felt calm, safe, easy. That was before she started telling me I remembered my own life wrong. It started small. I mentioned the town I grew up in, a forgettable place with one grocery store and a football field everyone pretended was important. She tilted her head and said that was not right, that I grew up closer to the city. She said it gently, confidently, like she was correcting a typo. I hesitated, then repeated myself. She smiled and said memory was tricky, especially with childhood stuff. I shrugged it off because why would someone lie about something that basic? The cafe was quiet except for the espresso machine hissing every few minutes. She wrapped both hands around her mug and watched me closely, eyes sharp, but not unkind. She had that calm presence that makes you second-guess yourself without meaning to. I noticed she never looked around the room, never got distracted. It was like nothing else existed but me and whatever version of me she had in her head. When I talked about my first job, she corrected that too. She said I started somewhere else, somewhere more impressive. She described it in detail. The uniform colors, the hours, the reason I quit. I stared at her, confused, because the place she named was real, but I had only applied there. I never worked there. I remember that clearly, or I thought I did. She told me it was mixing things up again. A small knot formed in my stomach. I tried to joke it off, but my laugh sounded forced even to me. She smiled patiently, like I was the one being difficult. She said she had gone through my stories before meeting me, that she liked to understand people deeply. She said consistency mattered. I started paying more attention after that. The way she nodded when I spoke, but only at certain points. The way she corrected dates, places, even emotions. If I said something made me nervous, she said no, it excited me. If I said I hated something, she said I tolerated it for longer than I admitted. Each correction landed soft but heavy, like a hand pressing down. The rain outside picked up, streaking the windows. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it, suddenly unsure if checking it would break something. She leaned forward and asked me about my live, what it felt like being there alone. I described it the way I always did, cluttered but comfortable. She shook her head slowly and said I had complained about it feeling temporary. She said I never settled anywhere for long. That was not true. I had lived there for years. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. Doubt crept in fast. Had I complained? Maybe once, jokingly. Maybe she was exaggerating. Or maybe I forgot. She pulled out her phone and scrolled, then turned the screen toward me. It showed messages, my messages. Screenshots of conversations I remembered having, but not like that. Sentences were highlighted, emojis circled. She pointed out patterns. How often I said certain things. How often I contradicted myself. She said this was why she trusted records more than memory. My chest tightened. I remember typing those messages, but seeing them arranged like evidence made me feel exposed. She said she was helping me see myself clearly. She said people rarely did that for each other anymore. The barista called out an order and the sound made me jump. She noticed and smiled softly, like she'd expected that reaction too. She said I startled easily, always had. I told her that was not true. She said I read once that I hated loud noises. I did not remember writing that, but how could I prove I did not? She asked about my parents next. I described them in broad strokes, keeping it light. She corrected me again, this time more firmly. She said my relationship with them was strained in a specific way. She described arguments I did not remember having. She described silences that felt real just hearing about them. I felt dizzy, like the room was tilting slightly. I glanced around the cafe, grounding myself in the sight of shelves and chipped mugs and a couple studying in the corner. Everything looked normal. That made it worse. I told her she was wrong. Flat out. The words felt heavy but necessary. She did not get upset. She did not raise her voice. She just looked sad. She said denial was common when people felt seen too clearly. She said she was not judging me, just reflecting me back. She asked me what my earliest memory was. I told her. It was a simple one. A playground. A scraped knee. She nodded, then said that happened later than I thought. She said I had told the story before with different details. She said trauma blurred timelines. I felt a flash of anger then, sharp and hot. I told her she did not get to decide what was real for me. She leaned back in her chair, hands relaxed, and said reality was collaborative. That sentence stuck in my head like something rotten. She ordered another drink without asking me if I wanted one. I did not stop her. My hands were trembling slightly, and I wrapped them around my mug to hide it. The smell of coffee suddenly made me feel sick. She started telling me about myself in the future, where I would end up if I kept lying to myself. She said she could already see it. She said she had seen it before in other people. She said I reminded her of someone she used to know very well, someone who resisted at first too. I asked who that was. She paused, then said it did not matter because I would understand eventually. The rain slowed outside, leaving the window streaked and dull. Time felt wrong. I checked my phone finally and saw hours had passed. It felt like minutes. There were missed messages from friends asking where I was. I felt a wave of relief seeing names I recognized, proof that my life existed outside this table. She noticed a shift in my posture and followed my gaze. She said this was the part where people usually tried to re-anchor themselves. She said it never worked the way they hoped. She said once doubt was planted, it grew quietly. I stood up abruptly, chair scraping loud against the floor. Heads turned. My heart pounded. She stayed seated, calm, watching me like this was another step she had predicted. She said leaving would not change anything, that the questions would follow me home. I grabbed my jacket and told her she was wrong about me, about everything. The words felt thin, but they were all I had. She smiled sadly and said I would come back once I realized how unreliable my memory was without help. I walked out into the damp night air, breathing hard. The street smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. I did not stop walking until my legs ached. When I got back to my live, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart still racing. Later, lying in bed, I tried to replay the date from start to finish. Details slipped away faster than they should have. I kept second-guessing myself. Did she really say that? Did I misremember something again? The thought made my chest tighten. My phone buzzed once. A message from her. She said she hoped I got home safe and reminded me of something I had supposedly promised to do tomorrow. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to remember if that promise was real. I blocked her, deleted the app. Still, sometimes when I tell a story about my own past and someone questions a detail, I feel that same cold doubt creep in. Like maybe there is a cleaner version of me written somewhere else, and I am slowly forgetting which one I am supposed to be. I realized too late that the smile he walked in with was not his real one. It was the kind people practice in mirrors, the kind that shows teeth without showing anything else. We met at a late night noodle place wedged between a laundromat and a closed pet shop, the type of spot that smells like broth and wet coats and never quite feels clean. I remember thinking it was a weird choice, but also kind of comforting, like nothing dramatic could happen somewhere so ordinary. That thought aged badly. He arrived exactly when he said he would, slid into the seat across from me, and immediately matched my posture. When I leaned back, he leaned back. When I leaned forward, he followed a second later. I noticed it but brushed it off as nervous mirroring. First dates are awkward. People copy without realizing. The place was narrow, tables packed close enough that you could hear other people breathing. Steam fogged the windows and made the outside world feel far away. The menu was laminated and sticky. I ordered something simple. He ordered the same thing without looking. Again, I told myself not to overthink. At first, he was quiet but polite, asked safe questions, laughed at the right moments, nodded a lot. It felt like talking to someone who had studied how to be pleasant rather than someone actually enjoying himself. Still, nothing screamed danger, just a mild sense of being observed instead of met. Halfway through the meal, after the bowls were half empty and the noise around us blurred into background hum, he did something that made my stomach drop. He pulled his phone out, set it flat on the table, and tapped the screen a few times. Then he looked up at me with that same practiced smile and asked me to rate the date so far. Not joking, not casual, like a real metric. My brain stalled. I laughed out of reflex, expecting him to laugh too and explain it was a joke. He did not. He just waited eyes steady like this mattered more than anything else we had talked about. I felt put on the spot in a way I could not explain. Rating a person while they watched felt wrong, like grading homework in front of the student. I did not want to be mean. I did not want to lie. I gave a lower score than perfect, trying to be gentle in my reasoning. I said it was fine, just not amazing yet. I said it felt a little stiff. The change was instant. His shoulders relaxed in a different way. His smile vanished and reappeared softer, warmer, more natural. His voice shifted slower, deeper. His posture changed too, leaning in at an angle instead of straight on. It was like watching someone flip a switch. He nodded like he had expected that answer. He glanced at his phone and tapped something again. Then he looked back up at me, eyes sharper now, more focused. He thanked me for the feedback. That word alone made my skin crawl. From that moment on, he was a different person. He started telling stories that lined up perfectly with my interests, even ones I had not mentioned yet. He laughed differently, more relaxed. He made eye contact at what felt like the exact right intervals. Every response felt tailored, optimized. It was impressive in a way that scared me. I tested it without meaning to. I shifted my tone, became quieter. He mirrored that too, lowering his voice, matching my pace. I leaned back again. He followed. I crossed my arms. He did the same a moment later. It felt less like conversation and more like calibration. He asked again how it was going now, not formally rating it this time, just checking in. I said it was better. His eyes flicked to his phone again, quick and subtle. He adjusted again. Even better this time. More jokes, more warmth, more familiarity. I started feeling like I was being studied instead of dated, like my reactions were inputs feeding some internal system. The noodle place suddenly felt too small, the steam too thick. I could not shake the feeling that the first version of him had been a test run. I asked him why he wanted a rating. He explained calmly that he believed in optimization, that most people failed at connection because they refused to measure what worked. He said he tracked conversations the same way he tracked workouts or habits. He said it saved time. That word again, time. He admitted he had different modes, different approaches depending on feedback. He said most people never noticed the switches because they were too focused on how they felt afterward, not during. He said my honesty made things easier. I did not feel honored. I felt exposed. The server came by to refill water and glanced between us like she sensed something off. I wanted to catch her eye, but my focus kept snapping back to him like he had gravity. He thanked her in a tone that sounded different again, polite but detached. When she left, he shifted back to the version meant for me. I checked my phone under the table. There was a message from a friend asking how it was going. I did not reply. I did not want to look away. He asked if I wanted to try something. I hesitated. He explained he wanted to see how quickly he could improve the score. He said he was aiming for something close to perfect by the end of the night. That was when fear finally cut through the confusion. I realized this was not about me liking him. It was about him mastering me, learning the exact combination of behaviors that would keep me engaged, compliant, impressed. The idea made my chest tighten. I gave a deliberately lower reaction to his next story. Flat response. No laugh. He noticed immediately. His smile flickered, then reset. He adjusted again, dropping the story halfway through and switching topics smoothly, but he had options queued up. It felt inhuman. I started thinking about how many times he had done this before. How many people had sat across from him and unknowingly trained him. How many versions of himself he had built from borrowed pieces of others. I told him I needed to leave soon. His eyes flicked to the phone again. He nodded, already shifting into what I guessed was an exit-friendly mode. Understanding. Respectful. Low pressure. He said he appreciated the data anyway. Data. I stood up, heart pounding. My legs felt weak but steady enough. He stayed seated, watching carefully, like he was logging my movements one last time. He asked for a final score. I did not answer. I paid at the counter quickly. The total was $21. Cheap for the amount of unease I felt. When I turned back, he was still at the table, phone in hand, typing. Outside, the night air felt sharp and real. Cars passed. Someone laughed loudly down the block. Normal sounds. I walked fast, not looking back. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A message from him. Polite. Calm. Thanking me for my time and feedback. He included a breakdown of what he thought worked and what he planned to adjust for next time. Not with me specifically, just next time. I blocked him immediately. My hands were shaking. When I got back to my live, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, staring at nothing. I kept replaying the moment his personality shifted, the smoothness of it, the lack of hesitation, like none of it had been real to begin with. Even now, sometimes when someone laughs a little too perfectly or changes their tone too fast, I feel that same cold drop in my stomach. Like I am not talking to a person, just the highest scoring version they have learned to be. I knew something was wrong the second she checked her phone and smiled like she had just confirmed a reservation I did not know about. We were already halfway through dinner, plates warm, drinks sweating onto the table, the normal point where things are supposed to either loosen up or quietly die. Instead, the night took a hard left turn and never came back. The place was a long, narrow restaurant built out of what used to be a warehouse. Exposed pipes, hanging lights, concrete floor that echoed every step. It was loud in that controlled way where you can still hear everything happening at your own table. I picked it because it felt casual and public, like nothing weird could really happen there. That thought turned out to be wrong. She had been fine up until then. A little intense, but not alarming. She talked fast, asked pointed questions, laughed sharp and sudden. She watched my face a lot when I talked, like she was tracking reactions. I figured she was just nervous or over-invested. I've learned to ignore that kind of thing early on. When her phone buzzed, she glanced at it and typed quickly, then set it down face up instead of face down like before. I noticed because she had made a big deal earlier about being present. She smiled to herself, then looked back at me like nothing happened. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps approaching our table. Not a server, multiple people. I looked up and saw 3 women standing there, all around the same age, all dressed like they had coordinated without making it obvious. Neutral colors, clean shoes, alert expressions. She waved them over like this was completely normal. No explanation, no warning, no pause to ask if I was okay with it. They pulled chairs from nearby tables and crowded around us, shifting plates and glasses to make space. Suddenly, our small two-person table was a circle, and I was sitting at the center edge of it like a display. The noise of the restaurant faded in a weird way, like my focus tunneled. They did not greet me like people normally do. No small talk. No awkward jokes. They just looked at me. All of them. Openly. Directly. One of them smiled politely, but it did not reach her eyes. She introduced me to them quickly, listing my name and a few facts about me that I did not remember sharing. Where I worked. How long I had been single. Where I lived. Spelled living, I guess. It felt like a summary someone gives at the start of a presentation. They sat down and went quiet. Not uncomfortable silence. Intentional silence. I tried to laugh it off, made a comment about surprise guests. None of them reacted. One of them tilted her head slightly, studying me like she was trying to see something from a different angle. My date leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and watched me instead of them. That was when it hit me. This was not a social thing. This was an evaluation. One of her friends pulled out her phone and set it on the table, screen dark. Another crossed her legs and tapped her foot slowly against the floor. The third rested her chin on her hand, eyes locked on my face. I suddenly became very aware of how I was sitting, where my hands were, how fast I was breathing. They started asking questions, not conversational ones, direct ones, about my job stability, about past relationships, about why my last one ended. Every answer I gave was followed by quiet nods, exchanged glances, tiny reactions I could not interpret. I noticed my date was not answering anything. She just watched. Occasionally, she would correct a detail or add context, sometimes changing the tone of what I had just said. If I framed something as mutual, she reframed it as my decision. If I downplayed a conflict, she sharpened it. I felt myself shrinking in real time. The worst part was how calm they were. No raised voices, no obvious hostility, just steady focus, like I had been put under a microscope and they were waiting for something specific to appear. A server came by to check on us and froze slightly when she saw the table. She hesitated, then asked if we needed anything. My date answered for everyone, ordering another round without looking at me. The server glanced at me like she wanted to ask if I was okay, then left. One of the friends asked about my future plans, not dreams, plans. Timelines, where I saw myself in 2 years, 5 years. She asked it like she already had answers written down somewhere. I answered honestly, but every word felt wrong the moment it left my mouth. They took notes mentally, I could tell. One of them scribbled something on a napkin, then folded it and slid it into her bag. My chest felt tight. I tried to steer the conversation somewhere lighter and made a joke. No one laughed. My date smiled faintly, like she had expected me to try that. She finally spoke then, explaining that her friends were just protective, that they liked to make sure she did not waste time. She said this like it was flattering, like I should be honored to be worth the group effort. I asked why this was happening now instead of before. She shrugged and said timing mattered. She said they needed to see me under pressure. Under pressure. I looked around the table. 3 strangers watching me. One person who was supposed to be on a date with me treating me like a test subject. The restaurant suddenly felt too open, too exposed. I could feel people at nearby tables glancing over, sensing something off. One of her friends leaned forward and asked how I handled criticism. Another asked how I reacted when things did not go my way. They alternated, keeping me talking, never giving me a break long enough to think. I realized then that they were watching how I answered, not what I answered. Tone, hesitation, body language. It felt like being interrogated without being accused of anything specific. My date nodded occasionally, approving certain responses, frowning slightly at others. I could not tell what I was doing wrong, which made everything worse. The food went cold. No one touched it anymore. Glasses sat half full, sweating onto the table. Time dragged in a warped way, like it was both crawling and slipping away. One of the friends finally said something that snapped me back into myself. She mentioned a detail from my social media that I had not brought up. A photo from years ago. A caption I barely remembered writing. The fact that they had looked that closely made my stomach turn. I pushed my chair back slightly. The scrape against the floor sounded way louder than it should have. All 4 of them looked at me instantly. I said I needed to leave. Not asked, stated. The room felt like it held its breath. My date tilted her head, disappointed. She said this was important. She said first impressions mattered. She said walking away would say a lot. That was the moment I stopped caring what it said. I stood up fully, heart pounding, hands shaking just enough that I noticed. I grabbed my jacket and phone. No one tried to stop me physically, but their eyes followed every movement like I was still being judged. I walked toward the front of the restaurant, legs stiff, back straight, aware of every step. Behind me, I heard chairs move as they leaned in together, whispering. I did not turn around. I paid at the counter quickly. The total for my part was $38. The cashier avoided eye contact, sliding the receipt toward me like she wanted me gone as fast as possible. Outside, the air hit me hard and clean. I walked fast, then faster, until the noise of the restaurant faded behind me. My heart did not slow down for a long time. Later that night, back in my live, I replayed everything in my head. The way they looked at me, the silence, the feeling of being weighed and measured by people who had already decided the scale. My phone buzzed once. A message from her. Calm. Detached. Saying her friends did not think we were compatible and wishing me luck. I blocked her without replying. Sometimes I think about that table and how easily it turned into a courtroom. How fast a date can become a judgment. And how quiet people get when they think they are allowed to decide who you are. The first thing that made me uneasy was not him, it was the menu. Not because of prices or anything dramatic, but because he took it out of my hands the second I started scanning the dessert section, like it was something I was not supposed to see yet. We had not even ordered food. The restaurant was one of those fake classy spots with exposed brick and tiny candles that barely did anything. It smelled like butter and cleaning spray, and the music was just loud enough to stop people from overhearing each other. I remember thinking this was supposed to be the easy part of the night. I met him online a week earlier. His messages were structured in a way that felt intentional, but I brushed it off as confidence. He picked the place, the time, even told me where to park. I showed up a few minutes early and sat there scrolling my phone, trying to calm my nerves. When he arrived, he did not rush or apologize. He sat down, straightened his napkin, and looked at me like he was already tracking something. Dinner started normal enough. He asked questions that felt a little too specific, but not yet alarming. Work schedule, sleep habits, how often I changed my routine. I answered casually, joking where I could, but he did not really laugh. He nodded a lot, wrote something on his phone once, then locked it and placed it face down. The food was good, too good for how tense I was. Every time I relaxed a little, he would say something that pulled me back into my head. Comments about discipline, about consistency, about how people ruin things by wanting too much too soon. He said it casually like life advice, but the words stuck in weird places. When the server cleared our plates and asked about dessert, I felt relief. It felt like checkpoint, a normal step forward. I started to answer, already thinking about the chocolate thing on the menu, when he cut in and said it was too early for rewards. Not joking, not smiling, like this was an established rule. The server hesitated, glanced at me, then nodded and left. I sat there stunned, fork still in my hand, trying to process what just happened. He leaned back slightly, satisfied, like he had just enforced something important. I asked him what that meant, trying to keep my tone light. He explained that he believed reward should follow effort. That dessert was something you earned, not something you just ordered because you felt like it. He said this applied to everything: food, attention, affection, timing. My stomach dropped, not because of dessert, but because of how comfortable he sounded saying all that out loud, like it was obvious, like I was supposed to agree. The candle between us flickered and went out. Neither of us moved to relight it. He started talking about previous dates, not complaining, just evaluating. He said most people failed early because they expected comfort without contribution. He said he liked to set expectations up front, so there was no confusion later. He said confusion wasted time. I noticed then how controlled everything felt, the pacing of the meal, the topics. Even when the server came by, he spoke for both of us. I had not noticed myself shrinking until that moment. sitting there waiting for permission to order something sweet like a kid. I tried to change the subject, asked him what he did for fun. He listed activities like tasks, gym, planning, tracking progress. He said fun was overrated. He said satisfaction came from structure. The word rewards kept echoing in my head. I glanced around the restaurant, grounding myself. Couples laughing, someone clinking glasses, normal life happening 10 feet away. That contrast made everything feel sharper. He noticed me looking around and asked if I was distracted. I shook my head too quickly. He smiled, but it felt like approval, not warmth. The check had not come yet, but the night already felt over in a strange way. Like I had failed something without knowing the criteria. I thought about just ordering dessert anyway, standing my ground. The idea made my chest tighten. I hated that it did. He started outlining how he saw things progressing if the night went well. Not romantically, logistically, how often we would meet, what would be expected, what would come later. He mentioned rewards again tied to milestones. I felt sick. I told him I was not comfortable with how he was framing things. The words came out shaky but real. He tilted his head, listening carefully, then explained that discomfort was part of growth. He said people often resisted structure because they were used to instant gratification. The server returned with a check, setting it down gently like she sensed tension. The total was $74. He picked it up immediately, scanned it, then slid it toward himself. He said he would handle it since he chose the place. That should have felt polite. It did not. I asked again about dessert more directly this time. I said I wanted it. He shook his head slowly, calm, and said not yet. He said the night had not reached that point. Something snapped inside me then. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clear line. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, turning a few heads. My heart pounded, but my hands felt steady. He looked surprised for the first time all night. Not angry, just recalculating. I told him I was leaving. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. He stayed seated, hands folded, and said walking away would be choosing impulse over patience. He said I would regret not seeing things through. I grabbed my bag and stepped away from the table. The server watched me pass with wide eyes. I did not stop at the counter. I just walked out into the night air, breathing hard like I had been underwater. Outside, the street was loud and alive. Cars passing, people talking. It felt unreal how normal everything was. I stood there for a minute, grounding myself, then pulled out my phone. There was already a message from him. He said this outcome was disappointing but expected. He said not everyone was ready for delayed rewards. I blocked him on the spot. On the way home, I stopped at a convenience store and bought the biggest sugary thing I could find. It cost $4. I ate it standing by my car, messy and fast, like I was reclaiming something stupid but important. When I got back to my live, I sat on the couch, the lights off, replaying the night. The way he said rewards, the way he decided what was too early, the way I almost accepted it. Later, lying in bed, I realized how close I had come to staying, how easily something small could have turned into something worse. All over dessert, all over control dressed up as guidance. I slept badly, but I slept free. I did not notice how quiet the room had gotten until she leaned in close enough that I could smell mint on her breath and said something that made my stomach drop straight through the chair. Not loud, not dramatic, just a calm, deliberate statement delivered like a contingency plan. In that moment, the whole date snapped into focus like a picture finally loading all at once. Everything before it suddenly made sense in the worst way. The place was an underground lounge tucked beneath an old hotel, the kind of spot you only find if someone tells you exactly where the side door is. Low ceilings, dark walls, soft lights that made everyone look smoother than real life. Music hummed constantly, not loud enough to dance to, not quiet enough to think clearly. I remember liking that at first. It felt hidden, controlled, safe. We met online and she suggested this place, said it filtered out the wrong kind of people. I did not ask what that meant. I showed up early and sat at the bar, watching the bartender polish the same glass over and over. When she arrived, she did not look around for me. She walked straight up like she already knew where I would be sitting. She was confident in a way that did not invite conversation, just compliance. She ordered for herself without opening the menu and nodded at me like I should do the same. I did because I did not want to slow things down before they even started. The first half hour felt like an interview that kept pretending to be a date. She asked about my routines, how I handled pressure, whether I ever felt tempted to quit things halfway through. She listened closely, eyes fixed, never checking her phone. Every answer I gave seemed to be weighed instead of received. The room itself felt strange. There were no clocks, no windows. The lighting never changed. Time felt stretched and flat, like it was not really moving forward. I remember thinking how easy it would be to lose track of hours down there. She talked about strength a lot. Not physical, mental, emotional. She said most people confuse being nice with being solid. She said she needed someone who could handle friction without breaking. I nodded along, unsure what role I was supposed to play. At some point, she moved her chair closer to mine, closing the gap until our knees almost touched. It did not feel intimate. It felt tactical, like positioning. She leaned in then, voice dropping low enough that I had to focus to hear her over the music. She told me that if the date did not work out, she would have to start over with someone weaker. She said it matter of fact, like she was talking about switching gyms or finding a different route home. The word weaker echoed in my head. My chest tightened immediately, not just from what she said, but from how casually she said it. Like people were interchangeable tools. Like strength was something she harvested. I pulled back slightly, trying to create space without making it obvious. She watched me do it and smiled faintly, like she had expected that reaction. She said nothing else about it, just leaned back into her chair and sipped her drink. Everything after that felt different. I started noticing how she steered the conversation away from anything personal that did not serve her narrative. When I mentioned a hobby, she reframed it as discipline. When I mentioned a fear, she reframed it as weakness I had overcome or still needed to overcome. She never asked how things made me feel, only how I reacted. The lounge filled up slowly, but the noise never really rose. It was like everyone was talking just under a threshold. Faces blurred in the dim light. I suddenly felt very aware of how far underground we were. She talked about past relationships without emotion. Not bitterness, not sadness, just analysis. She described people in terms of utility, what they could handle, where they failed, when they stopped being worth the effort. She said some people surprised her by lasting longer than expected. I wondered where I ranked. The server came by and asked if we wanted another round. She answered yes immediately, then looked at me like it was already decided. I nodded again, my throat tight. I tried to push back gently, asked her what she meant by weaker. She shrugged and said some people folded too fast. Some people needed reassurance. Some people wanted comfort instead of challenge. She said she did not have time for that anymore. She studied my face as she spoke, watching for micro reactions. I felt like every blink mattered. The drinks came and I barely touched mine. My hands felt slightly numb. I kept thinking about that phrase, about how she had already mapped out the failure of this date and the next one and the one after that, like it was just a step in a process. I told her I did not like the way she talked about people. The words came out flatter than I intended. She did not get defensive. She smiled again, that same faint smile, and said discomfort was a sign I was being tested. Tested. She leaned back and crossed her arms, gaze steady. She said she needed to know if I could hold my ground without becoming emotional. She said too many people mistook intensity for danger when it was really just honesty. The music shifted slightly, a heavier beat sliding in. The lights dimmed even more. I felt boxed in by the space, by the closeness of her chair, by the weight of her attention. I glanced toward the stairs that led up to the exit. They looked steeper than I remembered. She noticed and said something about people always thinking about escape routes when things got real. She said it was instinct, but not always useful. She said growth required staying present. I realized then that she believed she was doing me a favor, that this whole dynamic was something she thought I should be grateful for. I pushed my chair back a few inches. The sound was barely audible over the music, but she noticed immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not angry, just focused. I told her I was leaving. The words felt solid in my mouth, grounding. She did not stand. She did not reach for me. She just nodded slowly and said that was unfortunate. She said she had hoped I would be stronger than that. That word again. I stood up fully, heart pounding. The room seemed to tilt for a second, then steady. I grabbed my jacket and moved toward the stairs, feeling her eyes on my back the whole time. Halfway up, I heard her voice again, calm and even, saying something about starting over. Not to me, not loudly, just into the space like a note for herself. I did not look back. At the top, the cool air hit me hard. The street felt unreal after the dim warmth below. Cars passed. Someone laughed nearby. Normal sounds rushed in like a reset. I checked my phone. There was a message from her already. Short. Neutral. Saying she appreciated the attempt and wished me luck fighting what I needed. I blocked her without replying. On the way home, I kept replaying that moment when she leaned in. How close she was. How confident. How easily she had reduced people to categories. I realized she had never once asked what I wanted, only whether I could endure what she offered. Back in my live, I locked the door and sat on the floor, back against the wall, breathing until my heart slowed down. The quiet felt earned. Later that night, I thought about the word weaker and how it had been used like a threat and a promise at the same time. Not about strength at all, just about control. I slept with the lights on. The first time he said it, I thought I misheard him. The bar was loud, glasses clinking, people packed shoulder to shoulder, and his voice blended into the noise like it belonged there. I remember tilting my head slightly, trying to replay the sentence in my mind, telling myself I was being dramatic. I wish I had trusted that first jolt of unease instead of brushing it off like background static. We were sitting at a long wooden table in a shared seating bar, the kind where strangers end up inches from each other, whether they want to or not. Dim lights hung low, casting shadows that made everyone look sharper around the eyes. The place smelled like citrus cleaner and spilled beer. It was busy enough to feel safe, which is probably why I stayed as long as I did. I met him online a few days earlier. Nothing stood out in his messages. Polite, funny in a dry way. He suggested this place because it was public and lively, which made me feel better at the time. He got there before me and had already claimed seats, sliding a coaster toward me when I arrived like he was being considerate. The beginning of the date felt normal. Not amazing, not bad. Just two people making small talk over drinks. He smiled a lot, but it was uneven, like one side of his face moved faster than the other. I noticed it but did not think much of it. Then he started talking about accidents. Not in a sudden way. It crept into the conversation like a side comment. He mentioned how people underestimated how often things just happened. How most bad outcomes were not planned, just the result of small mistakes stacking up. He said it casually, swirling his drink, eyes flicking toward me to see how it reacted. I shrugged and nodded, not really engaging. He smiled wider like he enjoyed that. A few minutes later, he brought it up again, this time with a laugh. He said people would be surprised how easy it was to make accidents look unintentional. The way he said it was light, almost playful, like he was sharing a fun fact. My stomach tightened instantly. I flinched without meaning to. Not a big movement, just a slight jerk of my shoulders. He noticed. His smile deepened. That was when I realized this was not an accident, the comments, I mean. He kept going after that, weaving it into different topics. Stories about coworkers getting hurt in weird ways. News articles about freak incidents. He always framed it the same way, focusing on how no one ever suspected anything. How easy it was for people to accept explanations if they sounded reasonable. Every time he said something like that, I reacted before I could stop myself. My body tensed. My hands tightened around my glass. My breath caught just a little. And every time he smiled. Not openly laughing, just that small, satisfied curve of his mouth. It felt like he was poking at a bruise to see how sensitive it was. I tried to steer the conversation away. Asked about his job, his hobbies, anything normal. He answered, but always found a way to loop back. He talked about safety training at work and how most of it was pointless because people only noticed danger after something went wrong. He talked about how witnesses rarely remembered details clearly. He talked about how timing mattered more than force. I stopped drinking halfway through my glass. My head felt light, but not from alcohol, from alertness. My brain was scanning constantly, picking up on every movement, every shift in his posture. The bar felt different now. Louder in bursts, quieter in gaps. The people around us blurred into shapes. I noticed how close his knee was to mine, how easy it would be for him to block my movement if he wanted to. That thought made my chest tighten. He leaned in slightly at one point, lowering his voice. He said something about how most people revealed fear in small ways. Body language, reflexes. He said fear made people predictable. I felt my face heat up. I hated that he could see what he was doing to me. I hated that he seemed to enjoy it. I told him I needed to use the restroom, hoping to break the momentum. He nodded immediately, polite, even helpful, pointing me in the right direction. As I stood, my chair scraped against the floor, and I jumped again at the sound. His smile widened just a fraction. In the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and leaned against the door, breathing hard. My hands were shaking. I told myself I was overreacting, that he had not actually threatened anything, that this was just dark humor taken too far. But my body did not believe that. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked too bright. I tried to calm myself, rehearsed leaving early in my head. I did not want to be rude. I wanted to be safe. When I came back, he was exactly where I left him, posture relaxed, drink untouched. He looked up and smiled like he had been waiting. The conversation resumed like nothing had happened, but the tone had shifted. He watched me more closely now, like he knew he had gotten under my skin. He mentioned accidents again, this time in relation to the bar itself. Slippery floors, crowded spaces, people bumping into each other without noticing. He gestured vaguely around us like the room was full of potential. I flinched harder that time. My heart jumped into my throat. He smiled again, slow and deliberate. I realized then that this was the point. Not the words themselves, but my reaction to them. He was testing how easily he could get inside my head, how much control he had over my nervous system just by talking. The bartender came by to ask if we wanted another round. I shook my head quickly. He ordered another for himself without looking at me. The bartender hesitated, then walked away. He asked me if I was uncomfortable. The question sounded almost caring. I nodded finally. I told him his comments were weird and not funny. My voice shook despite my effort. He laughed softly and said I was sensitive. He said people misunderstood his sense of humor all the time. He said nothing bad ever happened just because someone talked about it. Then he said it again, about how easy it was. This time slower, clearer, like he wanted to make sure I understood. I pushed my chair back immediately, heart pounding. The noise of the bar surged around me. He watched me closely, eyes bright, like this was a reaction he had been waiting for all night. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and told him I was leaving. My legs felt weak, but they moved. He did not stand. He did not reach for me. He just smiled and said something about people always walking away before understanding context. I did not respond. I walked straight toward the door, weaving through the crowd, fighting the urge to run. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap, cool and sharp and real. I stood there for a second, bent over slightly, trying to slow my breathing. The bar noise spilled out behind me every time the door opened, then faded again. I checked my phone. There was already a message from him, lighthearted, saying he hoped he did not scare me and that people often misunderstood his jokes. I blocked him immediately. On the way home, every sound made me jump. A car backfiring, someone laughing too loud, footsteps behind me that turned out to belong to a couple arguing. My body stayed one tight until I locked my door and leaned against it inside my live. Later, lying in bed, I replayed the night over and over. The way he smiled every time I flinched, the way he watched instead of reacted, the way his words felt designed, not spontaneous. Nothing actually happened. That is what makes it worse. Just words, just smiles, just the knowledge that someone enjoyed seeing fear flicker across my face. Sometimes I still think about how he said it. Easy, casual, like it was common knowledge, and I wonder how many people heard the same comments and did not flinch. How many people never realized they were being measured? The night felt normal right up until the moment my face stopped belonging only to me. It is wild how fast a vibe can flip, how one small thing can turn a regular date into something that crawls under your skin and stays there. If I had known a single photo could do that, I would have kept my hands in my pockets and my head turned away. Instead, I smiled like an idiot and leaned in, because that is what people do when they are trying to be polite and not overthink. We met at a rooftop food spot built on top of a parking garage, string lights everywhere, picnic tables bolted to the concrete, the city spread out around us like a background image. It was loud with laughter and clinking trays and music drifting up from somewhere below. I liked that it felt open. Nothing hidden. Nothing intense. I remember thinking this was the safest kind of date. She was already there when I arrived, standing near the railing, phone in hand, taking photos of the skyline. She waved like she had spotted me in a crowd she already expected me to be in. She hugged me immediately, quick and tight, then pulled back and smiled like she was checking something off mentally. We ordered food from a window and grabbed a table near the edge. The wind was cool, the lights made everything feel softer. She talked fast, excited, telling me how long she had waited to meet someone who felt right. That phrasing stuck with me later. Felt right. Not seemed right. Not might be right. Felt. Halfway through eating, she suggested we take a photo together. Just a quick one, she said, for fun. I hesitated for a second, mostly because I hate how I look in candid shots, but the moment passed fast. I leaned in, she held her phone out, and the camera clicked. That should have been it. Instead, she looked down at her screen and her smile changed. Not faded, sharpened. She typed quickly, thumbs moving like muscle memory, then tilted the phone slightly away from me while still holding it between us. My phone buzzed almost immediately. I glanced down, confused, then back up at her. She was already watching my reaction. On my screen was her post. The photo of us, fresh and bright under the string lights. The caption sat underneath it, bold and final. Finally found him. My stomach dropped so hard I felt dizzy. It was not tagged. Not yet. But the comments were already starting. Hearts. Excited reactions. People saying things that sounded like congratulations. It felt like I had walked into the middle of a story that had started way before me. I laughed awkwardly and told myself to relax. Maybe she meant it playfully. Maybe this was just how she used social media. Still, my chest felt tight, like something had been decided without my input. She took her phone back and scrolled, smiling wider with every new notification. She told me people had been waiting for this. She said everyone knew she had been looking for the right person for a long time. The right person. I asked her to take it down. I tried to keep my tone light, like this was a simple misunderstanding. She looked surprised, genuinely confused, like the idea had not crossed her mind. She asked why she would do that when it was a happy moment. I looked around, grounding myself in the sounds and lights. People laughing, music playing, a normal night happening everywhere except right at my table. She said she did not want to hide things anymore. She said she believed in claiming what felt right. She said hesitation ruined momentum. My phone buzzed again and again. Messages from people I did not know. Friend requests. Someone asking how we met. The photo had spread faster than I could process. My name was not there yet, but my face was. I started feeling exposed, like I was standing in the middle of a crowd without clothes. She watched me closely, tilting her head slightly, studying how I reacted. She said she could tell a lot about a person by how they handled being seen. That made my skin crawl. I told her again that I was not comfortable with this. My voice shook more than I wanted it to. She frowned slightly, then nodded like she understood. She said she forgot not everyone was ready to be visible. She said some people needed time to adjust. Adjust to what? She did not take the post down. Instead, she started talking about the future, casually, like it was already outlined. Trips she wanted to take, places she thought I would like, how her friends were going to be so relieved. She said she hated starting over, hated explaining her story again and again. I realized then the caption was not about me at all. It was about ending her search, about locking something in so she did not have to keep looking. My food sat untouched. The city lights felt harsher now, less romantic. The wind picked up and made the string lights sway slightly. The motion made my head spin. I checked my phone again. Someone had commented asking if I was the one. Someone else replied yes before I could do anything. My heart started racing. I told her I needed to go. I said it plainly this time, no jokes. She looked disappointed, then concerned, then annoyed, all in quick succession. She said leaving now would look bad. She said people were excited. She said I should not pull away right after being introduced like that. Introduced. She finally noticed how pale I must have looked because she softened her tone. She said she got carried away. She said she would explain it later. She said I should stay and enjoy the night. I stood up. My legs felt shaky but steady enough. She stayed seated, looking up at me like I was breaking a rule she never said out loud. People at nearby tables glanced over, sensing tension. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a friend asking why my face was all over someone else's feed with that caption. My chest tightened painfully. I asked her one last time to take it down. She sighed, like I was being difficult, then said she would archive it later. Not delete. Archive, like this was a compromise. That was it. I grabbed my jacket and bag and walked away from the table. I did not run. I did not look back. I pushed through the crowd, heart pounding, every step feeling too slow. Behind me, I heard her call my name, but I did not stop. The elevator ride down felt endless. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked wrong, like I was seeing myself from someone else's story. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into the cool night air and breathed like I had been holding it in the entire time. Outside, my phone would not stop buzzing. Notifications, messages, screenshots of the post being shared. People asking questions I did not have answers for. I blocked her, then blocked again when new accounts popped up. I reported the post, but it stayed up longer than it should have. Long enough for strangers to recognize me at the grocery store the next day. Long enough for my face to feel less private. When I got back to my live, I locked the door and turned off all the lights. I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, watching the comments slow down as the night passed. Eventually the post disappeared. Archived or deleted, I never found out. Days later, she messaged me from a different number. She said she was sorry if it scared me. She said she just got excited. She said she really thought I was the one. I did not reply. Even now, months later, I hesitate when someone asks to take a photo. I think about how fast a moment can turn into a label. How easy it is for someone else to decide what you represent to them. All it took was one smile and one caption. The night started with one of those tiny red flags you only notice later, like a scratch on your arm you do not remember getting. It was nothing obvious, just a weird tone shift that I brushed off, because I wanted the night to stay easy. We had picked a casual place, not fancy, not cheap, one of those neighborhood restaurants with mismatched chairs and chalkboard specials written too small to read. I remember thinking it felt safe because it was normal. That thought did not age well. He showed up early and already had a table. He stood when I walked in, smiled, pulled out my chair, polite in a way that felt deliberate. I thanked him and sat, already feeling like I was stepping into a role instead of just being myself. The place smelled like garlic and oil, comforting at first. Music played quietly from speakers that crackled a little. Conversation started smooth. He talked about work, about how he liked structure, about how people took advantage of generosity these days. That last part slipped by without much thought. I nodded along, poked at my bread, tried to stay relaxed. When it came time to order, he insisted on handling it. Waved off my attempt to split. Said he believed in doing things properly on first impressions. I hesitated, then let it go. I did not want to make a big deal out of something that felt small. Dinner itself was fine. Not amazing, not awful. He talked more than I did, but I did not mind at first. He liked explaining things, how restaurants ran, how pricing worked, how people underestimated the value of small choices. It felt like listening to a podcast I did not ask for. The weird part started when the check came. The server placed it between us, and he reached for it immediately, pulling it closer to his side of the table. He glanced at the total, nodded, and paid without asking anything else. The total was $68. I noticed because I had been planning to offer my half anyway. The server brought back the card and receipt. He signed, then did something that made my stomach tighten. Instead of leaving the receipt on the table or crumpling it up like most people do, he folded it carefully and slid it into his wallet. I joked about it without thinking, said something about saving it for taxes or something. He smiled, but it was thin. He said it was important to keep records. After that, the vibe shifted. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, posture suddenly relaxed in a way it had not been before, like a task had been completed. He asked what I wanted to do next. Not suggestive, asked. I said I was probably heading home after. It was getting late and I had an early morning. The words barely left my mouth before his expression changed. He pulled his wallet back out and took the receipt back out, unfolded it slowly, smoothing it on the table like it mattered. He tapped it lightly with his finger and told me it proved he had invested in the night. He said when someone invested, there were expectations. My chest tightened hard. I laughed again out of reflex, but nothing about this felt funny. I told him I did not understand what he meant. He explained calmly, like he was teaching me something obvious. He said paying for dinner meant the night was not over yet. He said walking away right after would be rude. Unfair, even. I felt heat rush to my face. I told him that was not how things worked. He tilted his head and said that was how they worked for him. People at nearby tables laughed. Glasses clinked. The normal sounds of a restaurant filled the space between us, making the moment feel unreal, like this could not be happening in public. He slid the receipt a little closer to me, like he wanted me to really look at it. The ink was still dark, the timestamp clear. He said it showed effort, commitment. He said he did not like when people took advantage of that. I pushed the receipt back toward him. My hands were shaking just enough that I noticed. I told him I did not ask him to pay. I told him I had offered to split it. He shrugged and said choices had consequences. That word again, consequences. I tried to stand up. My chair scraped against the floor and my heart jumped. He did not reach for me, but he did stand too, blocking the narrow space between the table and the aisle just enough to make me pause. His voice stayed low, calm. He said we should talk this through. He said people always rushed when money got involved. I sat back down because the alternative felt like making a scene. I hated that part later. How easy it was to sit. He talked about fairness, about how effort deserved return, about how people had forgotten basic manners. He said the receipt was proof of a transaction. That word made my stomach twist. I looked around the restaurant, hoping someone would notice. The server passed by and glanced at us, then kept going. From the outside, it probably looked like a normal couple having a serious conversation. He suggested a walk, said it would be nice, said we could continue the night properly. He folded the receipt again and put it back in his wallet like it was settled. I told him no. My voice came out quieter than I wanted, but steady. He frowned slightly, then sighed like I was disappointing him. He said I was overreacting. He said he was just joking. He said I should lighten up. Then he smiled and mentioned the receipt again, said jokes had truth in them. My heart started racing. I realized I needed to get out of there now, not politely, not gradually. I stood up again, faster this time, chair scraping loud enough to turn a few heads. I grabbed my bag and stepped around him, brushing his arm. He let me pass, but followed a step behind, talking the whole time. He said I was making it awkward. He said he expected more appreciation. He said the receipt proved he had been clear. I walked straight to the counter and told the server I needed help. My voice shook then finally. She looked at my face, and her expression changed instantly. She nodded and stepped closer, putting herself between me and him without saying a word. He stopped a few feet away, hands raised slightly like he was innocent. He laughed and said it was a misunderstanding. He said he was just trying to be generous. The server asked if I wanted her to call someone. I shook my head, just wanted to leave. She nodded again and told me to go out the side door. Outside, the air felt cold and sharp, like it snapped me back into my body. I walked fast, then faster, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I did not stop until I was halfway down the block. My phone buzzed. A message from him. Calm. Annoyed, saying I had embarrassed him, and that next time I should be clearer about my expectations before letting someone pay. I blocked him immediately. When I got back to my live, I locked the door and slid down against it, breathing hard. My hands would not stop shaking. I kept replaying the moment he unfolded the receipt, the way he treated it like leverage, like proof I owed something. Later that night, I checked my wallet and realized how little money was actually on me. The idea that he thought $68 bought control made my skin crawl. I did not sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that strip of paper on the table, neat and official, turned into a weapon just by being kept. Now, anytime someone insists on paying, I feel that same tightness in my chest. Not because of money, because of what some people think it means. The first thing that felt wrong was how relieved she looked just seeing me sit down. Not happy, not excited, but relieved like something bad had almost happened and then suddenly didn't. It put a weird pressure on me right away, like just being there was already a favor I was doing for her. I noticed it and ignored it because ignoring stuff like that is kind of my default. We met at this small riverside cafe built into an old ferry terminal. Big windows, cracked tile floors, boats drifting past slow enough to watch. It felt open and calm, the kind of place you go when you want things to feel casual and low risk. I picked it on purpose for that reason. I showed up early, ordered coffee, and waited. When she walked in, she spotted me instantly and smiled like she'd been holding her breath. She sat down fast, almost too fast, and thanked me for waiting even though I hadn't waited long. She kept her hands wrapped around her cup like she needed the warmth. At first, I thought she was just nervous. First dates do that to people. I tried to keep things light, asked about her week, joked about the ferries. She laughed a little too hard, then apologized for laughing too loud. 10 minutes in, she told me how much she appreciated me showing up. Not in a normal way, but like she expected me not to. She said people usually bailed. She said she could always tell when someone was about to leave early. That should have been my cue, but I just nodded and said I was having a nice time. The cafe was busy enough to feel safe, but quiet enough that I could hear the water outside slapping against the dock. Every now and then a ferry horn would sound, and she would flinch slightly, then smile like she was embarrassed. I noticed she kept glancing toward the door, then back at me like she was tracking exits, even though nothing was happening. Halfway through our drinks, she suddenly went quiet. Not awkward quiet, head quiet. She stared at the table, then at her hands, then back up at me. Her eyes filled fast, like the tears had already been waiting. Before I could even ask what was wrong, she started crying. Not loud crying, controlled, shaking, trying to hold it in. People at nearby tables glanced over, then pretended not to look. My chest tightened instantly. I leaned forward a little, unsure what to do. She thanked me, over and over, thanked me for not running like the others. The words hit me wrong. Not running from what? Nothing had happened. We were just sitting there. I hadn't even thought about leaving yet. Hearing her say it made my heart race like she had read my mind before I'd had the thought. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed, and said she always scared people off. She said they could feel it when things were about to get hard, and they left before she could explain. She said it meant a lot that I stayed. Stayed. I told her it was okay, that first dates can be emotional. I tried to keep my voice calm, steady. She nodded, sniffed, and smiled at me like I had just passed some kind of test. The relief on her face was intense, almost overwhelming. She started talking fast after that, like she was afraid of silence. She told me about past dates that ended suddenly. One guy who went to the bathroom and never came back. Another who took a call and said he had an emergency. She laughed while telling these stories, but the laugh didn't match the words. She said she could always tell the moment before they left. She said there was a look, a shift. She said she watched for it now. She looked at my face when she said that, really looked like she was checking for signs. I felt my stomach drop. The cafe felt smaller suddenly. The windows that had felt open now felt like they were just there to show how exposed I was. I became hyper aware of my posture, my expression, the way my hands rested on the table. I did not want to trigger anything by accident. She apologized again for crying and said she didn't mean to put pressure on me. Then she said she just wanted someone who didn't leave at the first sign of discomfort. She said she needed stability. She said she'd been through enough already. I nodded, even though I hadn't agreed to anything like that. I felt trapped in a role I didn't remember accepting. A server came by to check on us, and she smiled brightly, instantly composed, like the tears had never happened. The switch was so fast it made my skin crawl. When the server left, she reached across the table and touched my wrist lightly, then pulled back like she thought better of it. She said she could tell I was different. She said she felt safe with me already. That word landed heavy. Safe felt like responsibility, not a compliment. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I jumped. She noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked down, then back up to my face. She smiled softly and said it was okay if I needed to check it. She said she understood how people prepared their exits. That sentence made my heart pound. I told her it was nothing and left the phone alone. She visibly relaxed. The fact that my not checking my phone changed her mood scared me more than if she'd gotten upset. She started talking about the future in vague but loaded ways. Not plans exactly, but expectations. How she just wanted someone who stayed. How she was tired of being abandoned. How she didn't think she would handle another person walking away without explanation. I tried to gently push back, said it was just a first date and we didn't owe each other anything yet. Her smile faded for just a second, then returned smaller. She said she knew that. She said she just liked honesty. Then she thanked me again for not running. I realized then that she was framing my presence as loyalty, like leaving would be betrayal, not a normal choice. The idea made my chest tighten painfully. Another fairy horn sounded, and she flinched harder this time. She laughed it off, said loud sounds made her nervous ever since a bad experience she didn't explain. She said a lot of things made her nervous now. She said people didn't realize how much strength it took for her to even go on dates. I felt myself getting pulled into something emotional and heavy and way too fast. I wanted to be kind, but I also wanted out. The problem was that she had already labeled leaving as something cruel. She started crying again, softer this time, and said she was sorry if she was too much. She said people always said that right before they left. She looked at me like she was bracing herself. That was the moment I knew I had to go. Not later, not gently, now. I told her I was sorry, but I didn't feel comfortable continuing the date. My voice shook, but I said it anyway. Her face crumpled instantly, like she'd been expecting it, but still hoped it wouldn't happen. She asked what she did wrong. Not angrily, desperately. She said she tried so hard not to scare me. She said she thought I was different. People were looking now. Not openly, but enough that I felt heat rush to my face. I stood up slowly, careful not to move too fast. I told her this wasn't healthy for either of us. I told her I needed to leave. She reached for my arm but stopped herself halfway, hands curling back into her lap. She whispered something about everyone leaving eventually. She thanked me again, this time for being honest. The gratitude in her voice felt like a hook. I walked away anyway. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. I stood by the river for a minute, breathing hard, watching a ferry glide past like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed with a message from her almost immediately. She said she understood. She said she hoped I wouldn't disappear completely like the others. I blocked her and felt awful about it. That I felt relieved. That I felt awful again. When I got back to my live, I sat on the floor for a long time, replaying everything. The crying, the thanking. The way she assumed my staying meant something deeper. The way leaving had been framed as cruelty before I even considered it. Nothing violent happened. Nothing dramatic. Just emotions used like barriers. Tears turned into handcuffs. Sometimes I still think about that moment. How she thanked me for not running when I hadn't tried yet. Like she was already telling the story of how I would fail her, no matter what I chose. I did not get scared right away. That is the part that bothers me the most now. I felt confused first, then annoyed, then that slow, heavy realization that something was very wrong and had been wrong longer than I noticed. Fear came last, like my brain needed proof before it let my body react. The date itself started simple. We met at a late evening coffee place that stayed open for people who did not want to go home yet. Warm lights, big windows, scratched wooden tables that looked like they had heard too many conversations. It felt neutral, which was what I wanted. Nothing fancy, nothing romantic enough to create pressure. Just caffeine and noise and an easy exit if I needed it. He showed up on time, ordered without fuss, and talked in a calm, steady way. Not charming, not awkward. Balanced. I remember thinking that balance felt rare and kind of nice. He listened when I talked, did not interrupt, asked follow-up questions that made sense. I relaxed more than I usually do on first dates, which in hindsight feels embarrassing. After an hour or so, he suggested a walk. Nothing weird about that. The night was warm, the streets were busy, and I was starting to feel restless from sitting. I agreed without thinking much about it. I grabbed my jacket, finished my drink, and followed him outside. The city felt alive in that late evening way. Cars passing, people laughing on sidewalks, music spilling out of open doors. It felt public and safe. We walked side by side, talking about nothing important. Favorite neighborhoods. Places we like to wander without plans. He let me choose the direction at first, which made me feel like I was in control. After a few blocks, he gently shifted us onto a quieter street. He said it was nicer this way, less traffic. I shrugged and went along with it. The street was lined with old apartment buildings and trees that blocked some of the streetlights, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Still normal, still fine. Then I noticed how confident his pace was. He was not looking around like someone exploring. He was not checking signs or hesitating at intersections. He walked like he knew exactly where we were going. I told myself that was silly. People walk confidently all the time. Still, a small, tight feeling settled in my chest. We turned left at an intersection I recognized. My stomach dropped slightly. I told myself it was a coincidence. Lots of streets look similar. Cities repeat themselves. We turned right. This time there was no denying it. The buildings, the broken streetlight that flickered instead of staying on, the small corner store with the faded sign. These were not just familiar. They were mine. My route, the walk I took almost every day without thinking. My heart started beating faster. I slowed my pace slightly, testing. He slowed too, matching me without looking. That was the moment I knew. I asked where we were headed. He answered casually, like it was obvious. Said he thought this way made sense. Said it felt natural to end the walk here. Here. We stopped in front of my apartment building. My live. The front door with the chipped paint. The intercom that only worked if you pressed it just right. The bike rack that was always half empty. There was no mistake. No confusion. No coincidence big enough to explain it away. I froze. He turned to look at me, smiling softly, like he had done something thoughtful. Like he had planned a surprise he expected me to appreciate. He said something about how convenient it was that we lived so close. He said it saved time. I had never told him where I lived. Not the address, not the street, not even the neighborhood. I was careful about that. Always had been. I felt cold all over, like my body had skipped a step. I asked how he knew. My voice sounded wrong to my own ears, thin and tight. He shrugged and said people shared more than they realized. He said it was easy to piece things together if you paid attention. Paid attention to what? My mind raced. Messages, photos, background details I'd never thought twice about. A coffee shop tag, a bus stop in the corner of a picture, a comment about walking home. I felt sick realizing how many small pieces could add up to something this specific. He stepped closer to the door, looking up the building like he was admiring it. He commented on the location, the quiet street, the way it felt tucked away. He said it seemed like a nice place to live. That word, coming from him, made my skin crawl. I took a step back without thinking. My keys were in my pocket, suddenly heavy. I did not want him to see which door I used. I did not want him watching me unlock anything. I told him I was uncomfortable. I said it plainly. He looked surprised, then confused, then amused in a way that made my stomach twist. He said he thought I would be impressed. He said most people liked efficiency. Efficiency. He pointed out that the walk was almost over anyway. He said it made sense to stop here. He said he had planned the route carefully so we would not double back or waste time. planned. I realized then that this was not a lucky guess. This was intentional. From the moment he suggested the walk, maybe even before, he had guided us here step by step, letting me feel involved just enough not to question it. The street suddenly felt empty, too quiet. The sound of the city seemed farther away, muffled by the buildings. I could hear my own breathing, fast and uneven. I told him I was leaving, not inviting him in, not continuing the conversation. Leaving, he nodded like that was expected, like this was just another branch of the plan. He said he would see me around. Around. That word echoed louder than anything else he said. I did not move toward the door. Instead, I stepped sideways, putting distance between us and the entrance. I pulled my phone out, hands shaking, and pretended to check a message. He watched calmly, hands in his pockets, like he had nowhere else to be. I told him I needed space. He raised his hand slightly like he was backing off, but stayed where he was. He said he did not mean to scare me. He said he just liked knowing where things ended. I walked away from my own building. That was the hardest part. Turning my back on the place that was supposed to be safe because I did not want him to see me go inside. I walked fast, then faster, not looking back. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. I circled the block twice before stopping. When I finally glanced back down the street, he was gone. That scared me more than if he had still been there. I did not go home right away. I walked until my legs ached, ducked into a store, pretended to browse. I kept checking reflections in windows, convinced I would see him behind me. When I finally returned to my live, I approached from a different direction, keys ready, eyes scanning everything. The door was untouched, the street empty. Still, I locked myself in and leaned against the door, shaking. Later that night, I got a message from him. Calm, casual, saying he hoped I got home safe and that the walk had been nice. He added that he liked how things had lined up naturally. I blocked him immediately. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me tense. Footsteps, voices, a car door slamming too close. I kept picturing him standing on that sidewalk, already knowing where I would end up. The next morning, I changed my routines. Different routes, different times. I stopped posting anything with location hints. I felt paranoid, but also justified. Nothing else happened. No messages from new numbers. No sightings. Just that one night and the knowledge that someone had mapped my life close enough to guide me home without asking. Sometimes when someone suggests a walk now, my chest tightens. Not because of the walking, because of the direction. The night started with that sharp feeling you get when you realize too late that you agreed to something without fully understanding what it was. Not danger exactly, just a sense that you stepped onto the wrong train and now it was moving. I felt it when I saw the place she chose. A quiet upstairs wine room above a closed bakery, narrow stairs, dim bulbs, the kind of spot people pick when they want privacy more than atmosphere. I almost turned around at the bottom of the stairs, but I told myself that would be dramatic. She was already there, sitting at a table pushed against the wall, back straight, hands folded. She smiled when she saw me, but it was measured like she had practiced it in advance. There was a notebook beside her glass. Not a phone, not a purse. A notebook. That alone should have set me running. The room smelled like old wood and something sour, maybe spilled wine that never quite came out of the floor. Music played quietly from a speaker in the corner, the same song looping over and over without anyone noticing. There were only two other tables occupied, both far enough away that voices stayed low and private. She asked about my day. Normal question. Normal answer. The kind of opening that lulls you into thinking this is just another date that might be awkward but harmless. She nodded at the right times, maintained eye contact, never interrupted. It felt like being listened to and examined at the same time. When the server came, she ordered without looking at the menu. I followed her lead. The wine tasted flat, like it had been open too long. I did not say anything. She brought up second chances casually, like it was a personality quirk. Said she did not believe in them. Said people showed who they were the first time. I laughed lightly, thinking it was just a strong opinion. Everyone has those. She did not laugh back. She reached for the notebook then. It was thin but heavy, the pages slightly warped, like they had been flipped through a lot. She opened it carefully, smoothing the page with her palm like it mattered. Inside was a list. Names written neatly, one per line. Some had dates next to them. Some had short notes. Nothing dramatic, just facts. She told me these were men who did not get second chances. The words settled into the room like fog. I leaned in without thinking, my stomach tight. The list was longer than I expected. Dozens of names. Some crossed out, some underlined. A few had stars drawn beside them, but not in a fun way. More like markers. She explained it like she was talking about a hobby. Said she kept track so she would not repeat mistakes. Said it helped her stay disciplined. She said people always wanted to explain themselves later, but explanations were just excuses in better clothes. I asked what they did. My voice sounded calm, but my chest was tight. She flipped to another page and showed me categories. Things like inconsistency, hesitation, disrespect, failure to commit. The words were broad enough to mean anything or everything. She pointed to a name and said he had seemed promising but asked too many questions. Another had been too agreeable. Another had changed his mind about something important. She said each one revealed a flaw early, and she believed in acting decisively. Acting decisively how? She did not answer that directly. She just closed the notebook partway and looked at me, studying my reaction. Her eyes were sharp, not cruel, just focused. She said she liked that I was listening instead of arguing. She said most people got defensive at this point. I felt like I was being weighed. The server came back with food, setting plates down gently like he sensed the tension. The smell made my stomach churn instead of hungry. She waited until he left before continuing. She told me about one guy who tried to apologize weeks later. She said he did not understand that his chance had already passed. She said she blocked him everywhere and removed him from her life completely. She said closure was a myth. I glanced at the notebook again. Some names were circled. I wondered what that meant. I wondered if my name would fit neatly on that page or if it would be squeezed in later. She asked what I thought. The question felt loaded, like there was a correct answer I was supposed to give. I said I believed people could grow. I said context mattered. I said first impressions were not always accurate. Her smile tightened. She said that was exactly the kind of thinking that got people hurt. She said second chances were how patterns repeated. She said she had learned that the hard way. She flipped to the back of the notebook and showed me a final page. This one was newer. Fewer names. Some written darker, like the pen pressed harder. She tapped the top blank line and said she hoped she would not need to add anyone else soon. My heart started racing. The implication was clear enough without being spoken. This date was an evaluation, and the list was not theoretical. It was active. I asked what happened to the people on it. She looked at me like the question surprised her. She said nothing happened. They were just gone. She said that was the point. Gone how? She changed the subject abruptly, asking about my family, my job, my plans. The shift was smooth but unsettling, like she had already gotten what she needed from that part of the conversation. I answered carefully now, aware that every word felt like it could be filed away. I noticed how often her eyes flicked to the notebook, even when it was closed. Like it anchored her, like it mattered more than the conversation. At one point, she mentioned that she valued people who understood consequences. She said choices were only meaningful if you accepted that they closed doors permanently. She said uncertainty was weakness. The room felt smaller with every sentence. The dim light pressed in. The looping song felt louder, more annoying. I checked my phone under the table just to ground myself. Time had moved faster than I realized. She noticed and raised an eyebrow. She asked if I was bored. I said no, just checking the time. She nodded slowly and said people often reach for exits when they felt judged. Judged. I pushed my chair back slightly, testing. She noticed immediately. Her posture straightened, attention sharpening. She asked if everything was okay. The question felt less like concern and more like a checkpoint. I told her I was uncomfortable with the list. I said it felt like keeping score on people. I said it made me uneasy. She did not get angry. That would have been easier. Instead, she smiled sadly and said that reaction was common. She said most people did not like seeing the system laid out so clearly. She said it forced them to confront their own limitations. She opened the notebook again and glanced at the blank space at the top of the page. Not writing, just looking. My chest tightened painfully. I stood up then, not abruptly, but decisively. My legs felt steady even though my hands did not. I told her I was leaving. I said it plainly without apology. She sighed softly and said she had hoped I would handle things differently. She said this was disappointing but informative. She said she appreciated honesty even when it confirmed things. Confirmed what? I did not ask. I grabbed my jacket and stepped away from the table. She stayed seated, calm, watching me like this was just another outcome she had prepared for. As I walked toward the stairs, I heard the notebook close behind me. The sound was quiet but final. Outside, the air felt cold and sharp. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing hard, replaying the night, the list, the categories, the blank line waiting. My phone buzzed. A message from her. Short, polite, saying she wished me well and hoped I would reflect on the patterns that led me there. I blocked her and walked home fast, checking reflections in windows, half expecting to see my name written somewhere it should not be. Back in my live, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart still racing. I kept thinking about how calmly she talked about removing people from her life, how organized it was, how final. Nothing bad happened to me. That is the strange part. Just words on paper, just a list. But I could not shake the feeling that if I had stayed longer, if I had tried to explain myself, I would have been added to it. Categorized, closed. Sometimes now, when people talk about not giving second chances like it is a strength, I think about that notebook and the way it felt to see blank space waiting. I knew I was done before I actually stood up, but my body had not caught up with my brain yet. That lag is dangerous. It is the space where people stay longer than they should because leading feels rude or dramatic or like admitting failure. I remember staring at the condensation ring my glass had left on the table and thinking I would stand as soon as the rain dried. That is how small my thinking got right before everything went bad. The place was a basement jazz cafe under an old bookstore. You had to go down a narrow set of stairs with chipped paint and flickering lights, the kind that make you wonder if the place passed inspection this decade. Inside, it smelled like old paper, coffee, and dust. The band was warming up, soft notes drifting through the room like they were testing the walls. It felt intimate and hidden, which I liked at first. He picked the spot. He said it filtered out people who did not like effort. I thought that was a little intense, but I was tired of easy dates that went nowhere, so I went along with it. When I arrived, he was already seated in a booth against the wall, posture relaxed, hands folded, like he had been waiting a while. The first part of the date felt off in a way I could not name. He asked questions, but they were oddly sequenced, like he was following a checklist instead of a conversation. He asked about my mornings, then jumped to my commute, then asked how often I changed routines. I joked about it, said I was predictable. He smiled like that was a good thing. The music started and got louder, filling the gaps between our words. The lighting stayed low, shadows stretching across the tables. I noticed there were no windows. That detail stuck with me later. He talked about timing a lot, how people thought they had more of it than they did, how hesitation ruined opportunities. He said it casually like general philosophy, but he kept circling back to it no matter what topic we started on. Halfway through, I started feeling that familiar pressure in my chest. The one that means I need to leave soon. Not panic yet, just instinct tapping on the glass. I checked my phone under the table. I had an unread message from a friend asking how it was going. I did not answer. He noticed the glance immediately. His eyes flicked down and back up, tracking the movement. He smiled and said something about how people always checked out mentally before they left physically. He said it like an observation, not a complaint. I laughed it off, but my heart started beating faster. The band took a break, and the room got quieter, which somehow made everything worse. Without the music, his voice felt closer, heavier. He leaned in slightly and lowered his tone, like we were sharing a secret. He talked about moments. about how people believed there was always a clean exit if things got uncomfortable. He said that was rarely true. He said most endings were decided earlier than people realized. I felt cold. I told him I needed to head out soon. I kept it polite. Vague, the way people do when they want to test how hard the other person will push back. He nodded slowly and said he figured that was coming. He said people always thought leaving was a decision you made in the moment. The way he said thought made my stomach twist. I shifted in my seat, preparing to stand. My bag was already half on my shoulder, my body finally catching up to my brain. The booth felt tighter than it had before, like the table was closer to my ribs. As I stood, he looked up at me and smiled, not angry, not surprised. Calm, satisfied. He told me to relax. He said this was the part where I realized it was already too late. The words hit me like a drop in an elevator. For a split second, everything went quiet in my head. The room, the tables, the band setting up again, all of it blurred. My heart slammed so hard I felt it in my throat. I froze, standing halfway out of the booth. He stayed seated, hands resting on the table, like he had nothing to prove. He said people always misunderstood that phrase, that it did not mean what they thought, that too late did not mean trapped. It meant invested. Invested how? He gestured around us, slow and deliberate. The narrow stairs, the packed tables, the noise building back up as the van started again. He said choices stacked. Time spent added weight. He said people convinced themselves they could always walk away clean, but the truth was messier. My hands started shaking. I tightened my grip on my backstrap to hide it. I told him to move. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He did not. Not blocking me physically, just staying exactly where he was, forcing me to slide past him in the narrow space if I wanted to leave. He smiled again, softer this time, like reassurance. He said I was overthinking it. He said nothing bad was happening. He said I should sit back down and let the night finish naturally. Naturally. I looked around, trying to catch someone's eye. The room was full now, people laughing, talking, leaning into each other. From the outside, this probably looked like a normal date with a tense moment. No one was watching closely enough to notice the fear creeping up my spine. I took a step sideways, trying to squeeze past. He shifted just enough to make it awkward without being obvious. My pulse spiked. He told me to slow down. He said rushing made people make mistakes. He said mistakes were how people got hurt. The word hurt landed heavy, even if he said it casually. I said I was leaving, not politely, not testing, stating. He sighed like he was disappointed, then nodded. He said that was okay. He said everyone reached this point eventually. He said it did not change what had already happened. I asked what he meant by that. My mouth felt dry. He pointed to the table, the empty glasses, the receipt folded neatly beside his phone. He said the night existed now, whether I liked it or not. He said memories mattered. He said connections left marks. Marks where? I did not wait for an answer. I shoved past him, brushing his arm hard enough that he rocked slightly. He did not grab me. He laughed quietly, like he had expected that too. I moved fast through the tables, heart pounding, barely registering the music or the people I bumped into. The stairs felt steeper than before. My legs shook as I climbed, but I did not stop. Outside, the night air hit me hard and cold. I stood on the sidewalk for a second, bent over slightly, breathing like I had just run. The city noise rushed in, grounding and loud and real. I walked fast, then faster, not looking back. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I did not check it until I was blocks away. There was a message from him. Calm, almost friendly, saying he hoped I got home safe and that he enjoyed seeing how things played out. He added that people always thought they were leaving first. I blocked him immediately. When I got back to my live, I locked the door and slid down against it, shaking. I replayed the moment over and over. The smile, the phrase, the certainty in his voice. Already too late. Nothing actually happened. That is the part that messes with me. No chase, no scene. Just words that turned the air heavy and made my instincts scream. Even now, when I stand up to leave somewhere and someone watches me too calmly, I feel that same drop in my stomach, like I am stepping into a moment someone else already named.